suggested that there may have been 2 attackers, given that police have said there have been 2 arrests. But a lot of the eyewitness reports that we're getting talk about 1 attacker. But, that may simply be because, they were in different parts of the train. In these kind of panicked events, when they're unfolding, they're very, very traumatic, and people's recollections of exactly what's going on might not be all they could be. So it's possible they didn't see a second attacker, but we know that the train was a fast train heading to London King's Cross. But when the attack broke out, the emergency cord was pulled. That signalled to the driver, of course, as well, to head to the next available station. And so you had signal staff, we're told, quickly bringing about a change in the track system for that train, and brought it from the fast line onto a slow line so that it could then perform this emergency stop at Huntingdon Station. And at that point, of course, the passengers, some of them have bloodied and quite badly injured, managed to run onto the platform and away. We're also told that one of the suspects, at least, had also exited the train at that point and onto the platform. This has not been confirmed by either Cambridgeshire Police or British Transport Police, but according to eyewitnesses, one of the suspects still had the knife, was confronted by police and then tasered and arrested. So an absolutely horrific and frightening chain of events that unfolded on this train. And of course, while the train was moving, those people were captive on that train. They couldn't really go anywhere other than just try to move to other carriages further up the train.
And that's it is so appalling, isn't it? You can only imagine the chaos, as you said, Mark, on the train. And we're also hearing about one man, for example, trying to protect a younger woman who was in the sights of either one or the other of these assailants, and the whole time, people obviously trying to protect themselves and their families if they're with them.
Yeah, I mean, those reports that are starting to emerge are particularly troubling. That man, either elderly or certainly a mature gentleman, did try, according to witnesses, to protect a younger woman, and was apparently stabbed in the process as well. I mean, what we don't know in all of this is just what the motivation was, whether this was actually a terrorist attack. The fact that you had the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, and then, of course, opposition politicians, other politicians commenting, gives you an indication, I think, of just how seriously this incident has been treated. I think, regardless of what the motivation might be, the fact that you have 10 people stabbed on a train is always an enormous story anyway. We had reports, we didn't report it on GB News, but it had been reported elsewhere that Operation Plato, the code name that police describe a marauding terror attack, had been declared. And what I understand is that attending officers did use the Plato code word initially, but it was rescinded. So that just kind of gives you, again, an indication as to, we're not quite sure at this stage what the motivation is. I mean, many people will be angrily, quite understandably, say to the Queen, of course it's a terrorist attack. You've got guys with a knife running through a train, stabbing people, and, while absolutely there is no doubt it's an act of terror in that sense, and, a horrifying incident, and clearly a deliberate attack, the fact that so many people were stabbed, what was the root cause of this, we are still trying to establish. Counter-terrorism police are assisting British Transport Police. They have primacy for this incident because it is an incident that unfolded on the rail network. So that is the responsibility of BTP. In the first instance, as is absolutely the case with BT, they work in tandem with their colleagues in terrestrial police forces throughout the country. And it just so happens one of the few strokes of luck, I think, in terms of this incident, if anything can be lucky in such a horrifying event, was that it pulled into Huntingdon Station, which is just a very short distance away from the police headquarters, the fire headquarters, and a big area trauma centre, a local hospital nearby as well. So a hospital that they could get the badly injured, and to hear that 9 of the 10 are in a life-threatening condition is unusual, and I think just speaks to the severity of the attack and perhaps how many times people may have been stabbed as well. But the fact that that hospital was nearby will certainly have helped the medics there on the ground to triage and get people off to that area hospital as soon as possible. And the fact that the police headquarters in particular was a very short distance away, I mean, it's possible that some of the armed units were already there, perhaps coming on shift or whatever, because obviously Cambridgeshire is not one of the bigger forces, and in terms of armed response vehicles, of course they have some, but it's not like an event unfolding right in the heart of London or Birmingham, for instance, where you would have lots of armed response vehicles very quickly on scene.
I mean, clearly a very complex operation for the police, Mark, when you are looking at what would appear to be indiscriminate attacks on that train. However, the fact that they have got 2 suspects in custody should give some clarity comparatively quickly, shouldn't it?
Well, listen, it depends just how compliant those people that have been arrested are. I mean, what happens, and I'm sure people will find this deeply frustrating, but what happens because of the processes around the arrest of individuals is that if they're arrested at night time like this, quite often they would be processed, of course, by a custody sergeant, but then put into holding cells overnight. They unless there was very good reason, normally would not be interviewed overnight and will only be interviewed come the morning once they've had a good rest. And of course, as I say, people will be thinking, why on earth would you bear any kind of thought for someone suspected of carrying out a horrific attack having a good night? But the fact is that they have to, by rule of law, ensure that they're well rested so that they or their legal team can't at some point argue that they were questioned at a time when, you know, they've been up all day and been up all night and weren't in any kind of position to argue and put a proper defence forward. So, listen, that's just a little bit of a sidebar, but gives you an indication when we say, OK, you've got two people in custody, we should know. They won't necessarily have been subject to any kind of detailed interview at this stage, and that will come. What should have happened, of course, and will have happened, is that fingerprints will have been taken immediately if they are known to the police for whatever criminality, suspected of being involved in terrorism, any of the above. They will flag up on the intelligence databases, and that will give the police a handle very quickly about who they're dealing with. What the person may have said, either immediately on arrest or indeed as the attacks were taking place, will also form part of the intelligence picture, gathering an idea of what was said. We know, of course, in terrorist attacks in the past that religious slogans have been shouted out on occasions by those committing terrorist attacks. So all of that in quick time, they get some idea of what was happening, but maybe they're not 100% sure. They certainly, as of last night, when I finished speaking about this just a few hours ago, were not yet in a position to declare this a terrorist attack. All we are saying is that they are being assisted by counter-terrorism police.
So we're looking at pictures, lots of people there, the police in the white outfits that they wear when they're collecting forensic evidence. Also been hearing about tracker dogs. So they'll be looking, of course, it's a darn sight easier to look for these things as soon as daylight comes, but that would have been happening all night.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Penny. What happens, of course, is, first of all, in responding to this incident, what you have are the responding officers dealing initially with the threat, which seems to be the two people that have now been arrested. So that immediate threat, people would imagine, is over. But the fact is, it's not. It's nighttime. It's a very long train with multiple carriages, multiple places to hide, under seats, in luggage areas, in toilets, potentially anywhere on the train. So that will have had to have been searched very thoroughly from carriage to carriage by those armed officers initially. What happened as well in real time, as of course they're dealing with 10 people, a significant number of people stabbed, dealing with them, triaging them, getting them to a place of safety and a place where they can properly be treated, is also a more detailed search for potential victims that might not have been either readily spottable in the carriage or indeed on the rail platform itself. Because if you imagine a train that's still a good number of minutes away from a station, people have been stabbed, they're losing a lot of blood, the doors open, these people can, close to unconsciousness, wander off in different directions, could find themselves under a train further down the platform. So you had very methodical searches that were taking place and have been taking place the last few hours, looking all the way up and down, as you can see from the images there, up and down the train itself, on the tracks, and looking underneath the train, right down the platform and the neighbouring area, local fields and everything around there, just making sure that no badly injured individuals who have just kind of wandered off and collapsed somewhere. And there's also the evidential search for the likes of potential weapons that might have been tossed from the train by suspects. So a lot of activity going on in and around this LNER train in recent hours. But again, you're absolutely right, Penny. It is so much easier, intuitively, much easier when the light comes up a little later this morning to begin that search all over again. And they will go back and retrace all of their steps to see if there's anything that they might have missed under the cover of darkness, because even with a torchlight, sometimes it casts shadows. You might have missed something with that. So they'll do all of that again. There'll be a proper forensic search with the forensic teams in the white coveralls as they go up and down the platform and the carriages, trying to get as much evidential and forensic evidence as possible to give them an accurate idea of what exactly happened in the carriages of that LNER service.
As you've made very clear, Mark, we cannot say this is a terrorist attack at the moment. That hasn't been clarified, but as you say, counter-terrorism police are working alongside British Transport Police on this one at the moment. But despite that, where does that leave the intelligence services and threat levels in the UK this morning?
Well, it's very interesting, this, because the police and security services are increasingly concerned about the growing terror threat. Just a month back, I was at a speech by the Director General of MI5, the Domestic Terrorism Services. He painted the picture of threats that this nation faced. And while one of the big takeaways from that was the threat from state actors. So those states like Russia, Iran and China that are increasingly putting operatives or hiring proxies to carry out activities on their behalf in the UK. On the sort of traditional terrorism front, if you want to describe it as that, there's real concern at what they see as a resurgence of two big terrorist groups that people could be forgiven for thinking had been consigned to the dustbin of the past, and that's Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Al-Qaeda, you remember, of course, after 9/11 and after that period in the UK around 2005, the early to mid 2000s, was very, very active with plots, often sophisticated, multi-pronged attacks that were being planned, but they were very largely degraded by coalition forces who went into Afghanistan, into Iraq and other places in that region and went after Al-Qaeda. And of course, you know, history tells us, we know Osama bin Laden, the head of Al-Qaeda, was eventually tracked down and killed. But in recent years, that group had never totally been completely eradicated. It was still there, very badly degraded, not really in a position to do anything, but they have slowly but surely been rebuilding support and capabilities. Add to that ISIS, the so-called Islamic State. Again, we had that period into the 2000s, 2016, 17, 18 in particular, really bad years for terrorism across Europe and in the UK. They were very badly degraded by coalition forces who went into Syria and Iraq to deal with them. But exactly the same story with Al-Qaeda. And this is the point, I think, that's really worrying the security services. Not only are they gaining support and capabilities themselves, but they have a determination with that to carry out or to influence terrorist attacks in the West again. So they have something that Al-Qaeda didn't really have back in the day, which was the social media that is in every home now, and every individual that spends way too long, especially individuals that are often rounded up and are arrested or killed having committed a terrorist attack. We find out that they've been all over social media being influenced by these extremists. And in a way that Al-Qaeda didn't have at the time. They've got that social media now. ISIS always had that. It used it to great effect, of course, in directing lots of people to carry out attacks on behalf of ISIS. And Al-Qaeda, you know, sadly is doing the same now. So some real concern amongst counter-terrorism police and the security services about the resurgence of these groups. So we should just add that that caveat, as always, it's not been confirmed this is a terrorist attack, or if it is, which particular group it might be aligned to. But that's just the picture for you of what we're dealing with here.
Mark, thanks very much for the moment. Yes, as Mark said there, we should stress the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has said, I'm deeply saddened to hear about the stabbings in Huntingdon. My thoughts go out to all those affected. 2 suspects have been immediately arrested and taken into custody. I am receiving regular updates on the investigation, and she goes on to say, I urge people to avoid comment and speculation at this early stage. Mark, thank you very much for the moment.
Right, let's talk to former Police and Crime Commissioner Festus Akinbusoye. Festus, good morning to you. I mean, what a horrific and tragic incident this is.
Oh, absolutely so. And my first thoughts go to the family of those who are affected by this absolutely horrific criminal activity on the train. I mean, who would have thought just going about your business on a train in Britain today could result in this kind of horrific attack? And just remember that we're now at the final weekend of school half-term in many parts of Britain, and there may very well have been kids on this train who had maybe even seen this unfold or actually been affected by the moving passengers from one cabin to the other. Absolutely dreadful, absolutely dreadful.
Yes, the trouble is, of course, is that it is very easy to get on a train, isn't it? I mean, you buy a ticket, you go on a train, nobody's checking you. It's not like you're going through an airport where you're being checked. And then this happened so very quickly, it appears, after it left Peterborough Station. And as has been said, very lucky in many ways that Huntingdon Station is quite close in terms of going by train, so that when the emergency cord was pulled, they could actually pull into Huntingdon Station.
Absolutely. So when as Police and Crime Commissioner, we in Bedfordshire, we were part of what are called a Tri-Force collaboration. So that included Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire. And it was a collaborated unit on some specialist policing areas. So firearms was one of those collaboration between those three force areas, which actually helped to increase the level of presence that you could have. And yes, that is right. There's quite a sizable firearms department around that part. I can't be very specific, of course. It won't be right for me to do so. But it doesn't surprise me too much that this specialist unit was able to get to that incident as quickly as they have been able to do. But also a huge credit to them for being able to respond and to have two suspects in custody as we speak.
It is worth pointing out, though, isn't it, Festus? I mean, in terms of the response, as you say, armed response pretty quick under the circumstances. But of all those officers involved in this and the ambulance crews and all the rest of it, I mean, a tremendously quick response in what is, for them, actually, I know they're doing their job, but a hugely, personally difficult thing to deal with.
Oh, it will be. It will be. And I got to meet and see these firearms officers in training. And I can tell you the level of training that they go through is fantastic. And I've also seen them actually in training dealing with emergency situations where they will have to deal with casualties, training alongside paramedics. And so I'm quite impressed by the way that they seem to have conducted themselves in this instance. It is not an easy thing. And of course, we often hear about the police not being responsive enough in other cases. But one thing we do see is that when there are potential life-threatening emergencies like this, they really do step up and do a fantastic job. And I've got to give a lot of credit to them and all the emergency services working together in partnership on this particular incident.
OK, Festus Akínbísọ́yè, it's really good to get your perspective on all of this. We appreciate your time on this difficult day. Thank you.
We're going now to the former Scotland Yard detective Peter Bleksley. And Peter, you talked earlier on to our colleagues about this, and I was just wondering about the witnesses. So you were talking earlier on, and we've heard this morning about how the two suspects who've been arrested are actually now presumably sleeping. But what about the witnesses? Because of course so many people were on this train. And you need to get the witness statements fairly swiftly, don't you?
In a perfect world, yes. Whilst the memories are still fresh in people's mind, you get them committed to paper by way of their witness statements. And those often, of course, are crucial when they're later presented at any court if there are charges. However, I should imagine travelling regularly on trains on a Saturday at this time, as I do, these trains are often packed with passengers. We have people following their football teams, for example, and other sports teams, people travelling to see friends and relatives, students going to and from university. These trains are very busy at this time of night. And I think we will have to wait and see, but I'm sure there was a huge number of witnesses here. So quite possibly in the very early stages of the inquiry, officers may have merely taken people's details and sent them on their way, saying, we will contact you as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah.
We don't know.
I mean, I tell you what, Peter, although sometimes we do, and perhaps justifiably, moan about CCTV coverage, it's at times like this that we can be thankful for it, because those trains, those carriages will have had CCTV, won't they, as well as the various stations where these two attackers may have boarded.
Yes, they will, and we have to keep our fingers firmly crossed that for evidential purposes, those CCTV systems were working. Let's hope that they were. Not only because, of course, the evidential value of those systems, and the police have understandably kept tight-lipped at the moment. It's still an investigation in its very early stages. But where that CCTV may be crucial is trying to establish, has every person that took part in this attack been arrested? Is there anybody that managed to escape, for example? We don't know yet, but I'm sure the police will appraise us as soon as they possibly can.
That's actually what I was going to say, was in fact that perhaps in terms of witnesses, some of those, when you're piecing together what happened and where these people came from, where they got on, it's really perhaps the witnesses before the stabbings happened where there are going to be found some really big clues, perhaps.
Particularly because the police, of course, have told us that they're working to establish the full circumstances and motivation. So in terms of full circumstances, yes, what happened prior to the attack? Where did any attackers get on the train? What was their behaviour like before the attack started? Was anything said? All of which may give clues as to a possible motivation.
And I know I mentioned this with Festus Akinbusoye a little bit earlier, Peter, but can I mention it to you as well? Because we're very keen in this country, it seems particularly at the moment, to criticise the police, and there's often justifiable reasons for that. But you know what it's like on the front line and seeing some pretty gruesome things. This actually, for those ordinary men and women who form our thin blue line, I mean, this is hugely traumatic. I know it's their job, but it's nevertheless a hugely traumatic thing to see and witness and work through.
Thank you, Stephen, for highlighting this. I think people sometimes, understandably, with all the other horror and a quest for other information, they forget. And in this day and age, and let me say, the trauma, the bloodshed, and the harrowing experiences that frontline police officers face in 2025 is a far, far greater burden than it ever was back in my day. And for that, the front line of policing has my absolute gratitude and my deep concerns. It is quite possible in this day and age that the very first police officers on scene may be young in service and young in years. And whilst, of course, our thoughts are primarily with the victims, and we all wish them well in what we hope will be their recovery, there is an understandable fallout for first responders who may have been valiantly trying to save lives, who will have witnessed a scene of absolute carnage, who, when the dust settles, may be left with elements of stress, trauma, post-traumatic stress. And in this day and age, if we are to keep the best of our police officers on the front line, I hope that police leaders are stepping up and understanding that if there is a need for counselling, if there is a need for officers to take some time off to decompress, that they look after their staff. They show that they are leaders and not managers, and they look after those officers who run towards the danger that we, quite understandably, would probably run away from.
The other thing, Peter, is that I know, obviously, at the moment, train lines have been suspended, as roads have been shut around there, but there will be people who are going to be travelling by train today and who will be, understandably, nervous and worried. What would you say to them?
I'm sure that anybody who's travelling on a long-distance train service today, whether it be leaving from Manchester or London, whatever line it may be on, will probably see an increased police presence today. I'm sure that British Transport Police will be scrambling every officer they possibly can to patrol stations, maybe even to get on trains and patrol them, and try and give some reassurance to the public that there is an able police service that can respond to any other similar type of incident. But it's really, really important to anybody who's travelling today, number one, check with your service provider to see if you have to go by some alternative route. But even more important than that, we in Britain must never, ever cave in to people who commit crimes like these. We must not have our lives altered. We must not live in fear. Sadly, in 2025, I know through speaking to so many people with increased crime levels in this country, people do sadly live in fear of crime.
Peter, as always, it's really good to talk to you, and thank you for giving us a sort of really clear perspective on all of this. Thanks very much indeed. Well, politicians have been reacting to that stabbing. The Prime Minister tweeted saying, "My thoughts are with those affected and my thanks go to the emergency services for their response. Anyone in the area should follow the advice of the police."
The Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, urged people not to speculate last night, writing, "I am deeply saddened to hear about the stabbings in Huntingdon. My thoughts go out to all those affected. 2 suspects have been immediately arrested and taken into custody. I am receiving regular updates on the investigation."
Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch said she was deeply disturbed by the reports emerging from Huntingdon. "This is an absolutely horrific attack," she said, "and my thoughts are with all those affected, including the emergency responders at the scene."
The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, also tweeted, "Horrified by the reports coming out of Huntingdon tonight, my thoughts are with those hurt and everyone who witnessed it. And thank you to the emergency services on the scene."
The Deputy Leader of Reform UK echoed that. That's Richard Tice, of course, saying, "Deeply concerned as reports emerge of a horrific incident at Huntingdon. Our thoughts and prayers are with those affected and our thanks go to the emergency response teams." Well, let's just remind you of the breaking news this morning. And Counter-terrorism police are now leading an investigation into a mass stabbing on board a train, which has left 9 people with life-threatening injuries.
British Transport Police say 2 people have been arrested in connection with the attack, which happened on a service between Peterborough and London.
Eyewitnesses reported scenes of panic, with one describing a man waving a large knife as passengers fled from carriages.
As we said, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer saying his thoughts are with those affected, praising emergency services for their swift response.
Well, former Detective Chief Inspector from the Metropolitan Police, Mike Neville, joins us now. I mean, it is just horrific, Mike, when we have these sort of incidents, and especially because even though counter-terrorism police are involved at this stage, we don't actually know what the motivation was for this horrific crime.
You're right, Stephen. We don't know. And what seems to have happened here, the police seem to have backtracked, because after the Southport stabbings, there was reports by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary saying that the police had to fill the void. They couldn't let misinformation spread. And, you know, we see the Home Secretary saying, don't speculate. But after the horrible incident in Liverpool, where I was in your studio, within 2 hours, it seemed like the police had learned their lesson, because they were saying that the suspect is a white British man. So we're now 11 hours after this incident. There's all sorts of descriptions being released. The police must have a very good idea who these suspects are. And I'm afraid whilst the response of those brave officers who've charged in there, made arrests and dealt with all the brutality of this, I think we've been let down by the Force Communications Department and the senior officers who should be releasing information so we know what's going on.
Yes, I mean, there are a number of eyewitnesses who have actually, who obviously we've heard from this. We've heard that one passenger appeared to be very brave, trying to protect a young woman. Absolute panic and mayhem, and one can only imagine the terror of those people as bloodied people staggered into their carriage as this attacker or attackers came through.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm mindful of the 2015 attack on the Amsterdam to Paris train, which of course was made into a film. The brutality was for everybody to see on that. You know, you're suddenly sat in a very benign place, you're on a train, some people are asleep, some people are chatting and having a drink, and then suddenly this wickedness unfolds. And I've no doubt there was some bravery displayed by the passengers. The response of the police seems to have been absolutely excellent. But the police and the Home Secretary now need to fill the void. They need to tell us what's happening, because, as you were speaking to Peter before, is there any more of these people on the loose? Are people on trains at threat? Are they at threat? Or have they neutralised these two men who were just lone wolves acting on their own? Because what you have in an incident like this, not only do you have the fast-time police response, the counter-terrorism police are often some of the most professional officers you'll find, and their access to intelligence is exceptional, and they'll have raided houses, they'll have seized phones and devices that these men were carrying or were in their homes, and they'll be searching those devices to see what they've been looking at, who they've been communicating with. You've already mentioned CCTV, and that was my area of expertise in the police. You know, they've been looking at that to see who was there with them, how did they get to the station where they are. All this backtracking will be done fast time by excellent officers, very well trained officers, and so they'll have a picture now of what's gone on. So if you compare it, for example, to Axel Rudakabana, within a matter of 2 hours, the police knew that he had ricin in his house and an Al-Qaeda handbook. But these facts were not disclosed for months later. And as I've said, Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary wrote a report, and they said things like this: there must be an accurate counter-narrative, there must be communication of the facts, and the police must fill the void. And with social media, a void grows very, very big in 11 hours.
You can understand, though, I mean, and you'll understand better than us, Mike, with all of this. In terms of releasing information, as you say, the nationality of the suspects may be important in this, but also you've got to be very careful, haven't you, not to jeopardise any future proceedings.
Of course, you don't jeopardise proceedings by giving basic facts. The proceedings that are ongoing in Liverpool have not been jeopardised by the fact that they said it was a white British man who was involved. After the riots which occurred after the Southport stabbings, the Prime Minister was quick on the TV to denounce all those involved as right-wing thugs. Now, how much did that influence, So whilst, yes, there are certain facts that will not be let out, the police themselves have written a report on how they dealt with the Southport incident badly and how they should deal with it now. And they seem to have followed that guidance when the awful incident happened in Liverpool with the crowds and the car, but they don't seem to have followed it now.
Yes, the other point here is that in the past, Sir Keir Starmer has talked about knife crime being a national crisis, in fact. And they say that 60,000 knives have been either handed over or seized by police as part of a broader crackdown over the past year. But it is that, of course, they are so scarily easy to get. That's the point.
You're absolutely right. Guns are hard to find, aren't they? A knife, me, you, Stephen, we've got those in our kitchen drawer. Anybody can access knives. It's just a dreadful thing. We don't, you have all sorts of, the politicians release all these laws. We must do something. We'll ban this sort of knife being sold online and we'll crack down on this. But the awful reality is anybody has access to knives, and knives are brutal. If you look at the Southport case with Axel Rudakabana, it's beyond devastation. What one shot the kitchen knife can do. And this is played out here, and we see the impact of knife crime on the streets. And it really is. I think people are seeing these things now and thinking, how is it that it's happening in Huntingdon? Huntingdon, a quintessential English town that I've enjoyed going to, the home where Oliver Cromwell was an MP. And people have associated knife crime with inner London, inner Manchester, inner Birmingham, and then suddenly it's happening all over the country. And I think it is very frightening for the public. And when you just can't sit on a train and whiz between Doncaster and London and sip your glass of Prosecco or read your newspaper or have a snooze without being in fear of being attacked by marauding knife men, it really is bad for the nation.
How quickly would you expect information to come out, Mike, on I mean, I know, as you said, this could be, it could be, in effect, a lone wolf attack, which we know are very difficult to predict. If it is anything else, then presumably intelligence services would have had some chatter, as they call it, on what was going on. I mean, how quickly would you expect some further information on that?
Well, I would expect the police to be releasing the information right now. There should be a press conference this morning where they should be telling the press what's happened, assuring the public that if there is a lone wolf attack, then that's what they know, and so people can travel the railways freely. If it isn't a lone wolf attack and they expect more of these sort of things, then what they're going to do about it, as Peter Blexley said, you know, the BTP, are they mobilising as many officers as possible? What are the police doing to secure stations? Because outside the station, of course, it's not the British Transport Police, it's the local constabulary, like the Cambridgeshire Police in this case. So let's know what's happening, because there'll be many people who are waiting to travel to relatives or a football match or some other event today by train and want to be assured that they're not in danger.
Except that, of course, as soon as these people are charged, then there are restrictions on what you can actually say about them. We do need to know, of course, where they got on the train as well.
Absolutely, and that will be what you have in counter-terrorism. You have a top team of CCTV digital forensic officers who will be checking every bit of CCTV to see where these people got onto a station, and then when they've got them at the station, they'll be backtracking on the CCTV to say how did they get to the station, where did they travel from, can they backtrack it to find a house where they came from, a car registration plate, and that will help them to seize more evidence, search premises. That's the vital thing. But already I would suggest that the police full well know who these men are, and they probably know some of their motives. And as I've said, I can only say that they should come out, tell the public what they know. Otherwise, the internet will fill with all sorts of weird and wacky rumours, which we saw after Axel Ruder-Cabana, some which are true, some which are untrue. We were being told by the government that he was a Welsh choir boy, which is sometimes just as bad as some of the other horrible misinformation that was spread. So to stop that, because we're not living in 1975 where people rely on the BBC News and the newspapers. Everybody has access to social media, and people who have wicked intent can fill social media with all sorts of vicious and evil rumours, which then may well cause trouble, which it should never have done if the police put the proper narrative out and put it out now.
Can I just, I mean, it's taking a step back slightly, Mike, but I mean, obviously you focus a lot on CCTV. What are we to make of this? There is concern about how much we are surveilled, and there's concern about facial recognition being rolled out and all these sort of incidents. Are they a necessary evil that we just have to have now, either to keep us safe or to be able to track down people who commit such evil acts?
Well, there should always be controls on these things. So the CCTV on the trains, for example, isn't really viewed until something happens. So you're not really watched. No one's sat watching those cameras on the trains. What will happen is if something happens, the police will download that. The British Transport Police have an excellent facility where they can download the images and watch them. So, and it does take a lot of time. So the public can be sure that the police don't randomly look at CCTV unless there's a very serious incident, because it would take far too much time. Again, with facial recognition, it may be used retrospectively when they've got some CCTV to find people. What people often don't like is the idea that the facial recognition cameras are capturing people as they walk into a station, and the police have got to follow very tight guidelines around that. But what I think winds people up is that when it's not a terrorist incident like this or a very serious incident like this, what they find is when they're mugged in the street or on a bus or something, and the CCTV is readily apparent, the police tell them it's not working and the person's never found. But of course, when you park your car in the wrong place or turn into a box junction and stuff like that, it always catches you. And that's where people get upset. If we're going to have CCTV, it's got to be used effectively. And at the moment, For volume crime, your burglaries, your robberies, the police are not using it effectively. They could catch far more criminals. They do use it in cases like this very effectively.
Except, Mike, of course, you know, talking about facial recognition, if somebody's getting on, they're dressed all in black, they're wearing face coverings of some sort, it makes it more difficult anyway, doesn't it?
Yes, of course it does. And this is why you've got to use the human element. So another area of my expertise in the police, I employed the human super recognisers, people who've got an amazing natural memory for faces. And we're what most things the computers can beat us at. I think it's about 30 years since a human beat a computer at chess. But humans are still better than computers at identifying faces, particularly if you can just see something like the eyes or how somebody walks. You'll realise that if you saw a relative walking down the street, you might recognise them from the back of their head. A computer cannot do that. So with the police, they've got to combine CCTV, all the artificial intelligence and facial recognition, but also use the skills of their officers and staff who are human super recognisers to pick people out if they are wearing masks or balaclavas and that sort of thing.
Mike, also, do you think that at this point, one assumes that the people, that these two people who've been arrested, they know who they are, they know their identity. Will the police immediately go round to the communities where they are from right now, or will they leave that till later?
That will be dealt with. They'll be looking at who these people are, what connections they have, and how they can manage that. But the initial response will be to gather as much intelligence on these men as possible and raid any premises that they control to seize any other evidence and any other weapons that may be there, and also to try and find any associates. So that will be the immediate response. Dealing with the sort of community issues will be a key concern, but it'll be something that will be discussed and dealt with in the medium term. The fast time response here is to secure evidence and prevent any further attacks such as this.
Thank you very much. That's Mike Neville, former Detective Chief Inspector of the Metropolitan Police.
Right, let's just check back in with our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. As we approach 7 o'clock, Mark, will you just sort of give us a recap of to where we are on this breaking story?
Well, in terms of the motivation, it still has not yet been declared a terrorist incident, but the Counter-terrorism Command detectives are investigating and assisting British Transport Police with the ongoing investigation. Certainly, we can say that it was a mass casualty attack. It appeared to be a deliberate attack that targeted passengers towards the back of this LNER train. Increasing numbers of eyewitness reports now starting to give us a bit of a clearer picture of what happened. This was the LNER service out of Doncaster, left at 18:25. Now, apparently it was just about 10 minutes or so from Peterborough station, continuing on its southward journey towards King's Cross, when a number of people started running forward. There were screams in the carriages towards the rear of the train, and people shouting that a suspect, a man, had a knife and was stabbing people. Clearly, a number of those who were running through the carriages were quite badly injured, a lot of blood, a lot of panic, and then people were just pushing ever forward right to the front carriages of this train as it continued on its journey, as is the protocol. Although people pulled the emergency cord and staff on board the train alerted the driver as well, it is absolutely part of a well-rehearsed protocol that they have to continue to the next station. People might wonder why on earth the driver didn't stop so that people could get off the train quickly, but you can't do that really, if you think about it, in the middle of nowhere at night on a busy rail line, with, of course, you know, electrified wires on the track as well, or overhead. So clearly there are real potential dangers of just stopping where he was. So he had to continue for quite a few minutes more until he got into Huntingdon Station. It was, we're told, a fast train to King's Cross, but it was diverted by signallers onto a slower track to be able to allow it to make that emergency stop at Huntingdon. And then the emergency services were responding as well, because they were getting reports from members of the public from 7:39 onwards that this stabbing attack was taking place. So they responded, and almost as the train was pulling in, the first emergency services were on the scene as well. Aided in a sense by the fact that the headquarters for Cambridgeshire Police, and indeed the primary unit for Cambridgeshire Police for the firearms division, is based at Huntingdon Police Headquarters, which is just a few hundred metres away from the Huntingdon rail station. So they could be on scene very quickly. And normally what happens, of course, in this area, it's a regional police force. It's not one of the big metropolitan forces like the Metropolitan Police or indeed West Midlands or Greater Manchester, where you have significant armed police resources concentrated in the big city centres. Here they have to share their armed resources. So Cambridge shares its armed police resources with Bedfordshire and also Hertfordshire. You can see from the image there that we're showing you now, that gives you the perfect illustration of what I've been talking about, just how close Huntingdon, Cambridgeshire Police Headquarters in Huntingdon is. That's to the top left-hand side of the frame there, and then in the middle of the frame towards the bottom, of course, is Huntingdon Railway Station. It literally is just a few hundred metres away. So given that that is the firearms base, there's another, for those three forces that I mentioned, Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire, based at Luton Airport. That's another big armed firearms unit base there at the airport for obvious reasons, but they also keep other armed response vehicles there for the three sort of counties as well. That would have been some distance away, because it's a good 45 minutes or so travelling time from the airport to this location. But it was very close to the police headquarters, and that's why we saw really quite quickly the armed police able to confront their prime suspect on the platform, a man who eyewitnesses said was still carrying a knife and who was tasered. What we've yet to get to the bottom of is the reports from British Transport Police still say that 2 people were very quickly arrested. So we'll see, of course, now that we are approaching again the daylight hours, when they have time to get a much more sort of firm idea of how events unfolded, whether we are looking at one suspected attacker or 2 suspected attackers, which is perfectly possible. But the eyewitness reports that have come out so far certainly just talking about one.
Also, Mark, we did hear that there was this word, the national code word, used by Police and Emergency Service when responding to a what they call marauding terrorist attack. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, this is the code word Plato, which can be used to denote a marauding terrorist attack. We last heard that used up at the synagogue attack that took place just recently in Manchester. Again, with on that occasion a marauding terrorist who ploughed his car into the front gates of the synagogue and then started stabbing and trying to stab other members of the synagogue who were barricading themselves in behind a closed door. So Operation Plato was declared on that occasion. Now, we're told from sources that Plato was declared initially by responding officers, but then was rescinded, which I'm not sure why that would have happened unless they managed to get some more information that either clarified it or at the point, it denotes a marauding terrorist attack. So it's possible that with suspects in custody, Plato was stood down rather than rescinded. This may all be in the language of the way in which some of these things are reported in the early hours after an event. I wouldn't get too hung up on that, because just like eyewitness recollections of what happened, these are traumatic, fast-moving events. People can see things. It brings to mind, I remember back in the day in 2005, at the time of the 21/7 bombings on the London transport system. These were the bombings that took place, or attempted bombings, after 7/7. And so 2 weeks later, another group of terrorists tried to do the same. They were at large. The police were trying to track them down, and a terrible mistake happened. A young Brazilian man called Jean-Charles de Menezes was tracked down as a potential suspect, chased down into a London Underground station at Stockwell Tube in southwest London. And the eyewitness reports that came out at the time were telling the media that this young man had been running down into the tube. He'd vaulted the ticket barriers and ran down into the tube. And of course that pointed to his guilt, but eyewitnesses had actually seen the armed police chasing after him, vaulting the ticket barriers and going down. Jean-Charles had just used his ticket to go down. So that, I wanted to share that with you, just to show you how eyewitness recollections in very traumatic, fast-moving circumstances can sometimes just be a little bit inaccurate, but we get a clearer picture over time. And that, Penny and Stephen, is what we've been getting this morning, with more and more of these eyewitness reports really being quite consistent in the way they've been corroborating each other.
OK, Mark, for the time being, thank you. Just to recap where we are then, this incident taking place on the 6:25 Peterborough to London train, pulling in at Huntingdon station after the emergency cord was pulled just before 7:30. 10 people have been stabbed on board that train. All 10 are in hospital. No one has died, but 9 are in a life-threatening condition at the moment. It is an absolutely horrific incident.
Yeah.
And we have 2 men in custody at the moment. That is the breaking news this morning at 7 o'clock, that 9 people are fighting for their lives after that mass stabbing on a train in Cambridgeshire.
Police have declared a major incident, and counter-terrorism officers are investigating the attack in which those passengers were attacked.
2 men have been arrested at Huntingdon Station by armed police. That was just before 8 o'clock.
Witnesses say passengers hid in the lavatories to avoid the assailants, with others describing scenes of pure chaos and saying it was like something from a film.
Meanwhile, political reactions are coming in, unsurprisingly, of course. The Prime Minister has said the appalling incident is deeply concerning and is urging people to follow the advice of the local authorities.
This morning, forensic teams have been seen on site, scouring the tracks near the train.
It has just gone 7 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
I'm Penny Smith, and this is GB News Breakfast.
So if you are just joining us this morning, it's not a happy day. That incident last night on board that LNER train is just utterly horrific, and we don't really know quite what has gone on at the moment. We know that 10 people have been stabbed, 9 are in a critical condition, but it is a truly horrific situation.
Yeah. The train left Peterborough at 7:30, and then it was 8 o'clock, pretty much 8 o'clock, when there were arrests. I mean, it was very, very quick. This is such an appalling situation. Joining us again, our Home and Security editor, Mark White. And you mentioned, Mark, earlier on about the fact that this was the reason why it happened at Huntingdon. The emergency cord was pulled, but they didn't stop immediately because they were approaching Huntingdon, and it is so much easier to actually get people off a train and get the emergency services to a place which is actually a station rather than on a line in the middle of nowhere.
That's exactly right. On a fast mainline service with live wires, with trains still, of course, using that service to park up in pitch blackness, of course, there's an imperative to get those passengers to safety. But the protocol for these drivers is just get to a station. At that point, emergency services can more easily access a station as well. And as we were just talking about in the last few minutes, they were aided by the fact that Huntingdon is also the location for Cambridgeshire Police headquarters and the headquarters of the firearms unit there. So they were on scene pretty quickly. As we continue to look at these pictures, I thought it's worth bringing you an eyewitness account from a chap called Ollie Foster, who was on the train. He's been quite widely quoted this morning. He said, and I think it's worth bringing this to you because it's a first-person account. It's detailed, but it gives a real indication as to how things were unfolding. He said, "At first I thought it was a joke, but quickly realised they were serious. Some people coming thought he had a gun. We really didn't know what we were up against. As I ran, I put my hand on a chair. When I looked at my hand, it was covered in blood. There was blood on the top of countless chairs coming from two of the guys who'd been severely stabbed ahead of me. A young girl was distraught as the attacker tried to stab her, but a hero of an older man got in the way, taking a gash to his forehead." And that corroborates, quite a number of the other eyewitness reports we were getting as well. He goes on to say, and I think there was another stab wound to his neck. We all ran to the end of the train, and pretty soon we realised it was a short train. Everyone was queued at the front, and I was one of the people at the back of that queue. I was standing there with a few others trying to find any kind of weapon. One person I knew got ready with a Jack Daniels bottle. I had nothing for what felt like 10 minutes. I watched that carriage doorway waiting to see a figure appear. I knew he had a knife from everyone's wounds, but from somebody's previous comments, there was a chance he had a gun. So I stood there praying. We all tried to keep calm, but you could feel everyone's adrenaline. I mean, it's incredible stuff to hear from an eyewitness himself. He's posted this on the social media platform X to get his story out there. He said the train eventually stopped, and I thank God I didn't see anybody come through that doorway. Everyone ran out of the train at Huntingdon, and as I ran out, I looked to my right, knowing that's where the attacker would come. And that's when I saw about 20 people running in pure panic, at least 3 of which were covered in blood. One guy was holding his stomach, of which blood was pouring out, shouting, "Help, help, I've been stabbed." He goes on to say, "We all ran together, being completely unarmed against an attacker or attackers that we thought had a gun. You really did feel helpless." To the police's credit, as we left the train station, they were all arriving. The response was really good, Ollie Foster says. Then he says, "The scene became everything you're seeing on social media. I'm not sure how travelling on trains will feel after this. I haven't really processed it all. It felt genuinely surreal and is something I don't wish anyone to experience. Knowing somebody has weapons and you have nothing, knowing they're willing to strike a woman and I think children, it wasn't the England I grew up in. It was barbaric." That, the very powerful words from Ollie Foster, one of the passengers on board that train. Has been widely reported as being on board that train, who has posted an account of those terrifying moments now on social media.
I mean, as you say, Mark, it's utterly horrific to hear those words. But what we don't, I mean, what the police will be looking for now, and what we don't seem to have any indication of from them yet, is any motive for this.
Not as yet. I mean, they may know a motive and they're just not sharing it. You know, we're in a different era now, given what has gone before with previous incidents. And we think back to Southport and all of the speculation that was out there, the void of a lack of information that was filled with lots of information on social media. Some of it wrong, but some of it actually right in the fullness of time. You know, we got very assured words from the authorities and politicians who shouted down any talk that this was a terrorist incident. And then, of course, that prime suspect, Axel Rudikabana, at his trial, we actually heard that he had a fixation with the Taliban, that he had been downloading the Al-Qaeda cookbook, that sort of manual on how to prepare terrorist attacks. There's no defined motivation at the end of it, but, you know, all of the indicators are that, you know, there's some aspects of it that do fall down the line of terrorism, because he is now being held as a terrorist prisoner. He was prosecuted on terrorism charges. So it just shows you, you know, we know the fallout from Southport resulted in a great deal of anger, and then the protests and unrest that we saw in multiple locations around the country. And we're told that the authorities are cognizant of that. They try to get information out as quickly as possible. That's why they tell us now, for instance, about the ethnicity of someone involved in an incident like that, like this. If they've been arrested, we normally get that kind of information, and of course what their potential motivation might be, because these things can evolve as they investigate and interrogate an individual. They might get more in the way of information, but they will have been able, just from the very early stages, able to probably identify whoever their suspect or suspects are quite quickly from taking those fingerprints, photographs, other DNA. So if this person has been known to the authorities before for previous potential previous offending behaviour, or is on terror databases, that kind of thing, that helps them immediately get a handle on who someone is. And it may be that that person has cooperated in the first instance. I was saying a little earlier today that normally people, when they're arrested at night time, are processed, but then put in a cell overnight and not really interviewed until the morning, just for the PACE, Police and Crime Evidence Act rules stipulate that, to ensure that defence lawyers can't come back further down the line and say that their clients were too tired when they were initially first interviewed. So it may be that this person has not yet been interviewed in detail and able to give their account, if they're even willing, of course, to be that cooperative. Sometimes they're not.
Whether or not this is a terrorist attack, it was terrifying. And I think many people watching this today will be imagining how they would have reacted, what they would have done in the circumstances. And it's quite interesting, because I was just thinking, what would I have done? And then I thought, well, I'd have locked the door. But of course, if you lock the door of the train, and I don't know how you can lock the door of the train, but if you could lock the door of the train, what you're then doing is denying an exit for anybody else who's trying to get away from these people. It is, as I said, it's terrifying any which way you look at it.
You're absolutely right, Penny, that we obviously people can get hung up and fixated on the motivation or you know, this being declared a terrorist incident. What absolutely is the case is that this was a marauding attack, whatever the actual motivation behind this attack was, and that will come out in the fullness of time. Now, people want to know this, understandably, because they're very concerned about the wider threat that's out there and whether this possibly is an indicator that we are back in a period that we were in the last time was 2017, which was a horrific period at the height of the Islamic State, ISIS terrorist group, when there were 5 terrorist attacks in that single year of 2017, including, of course, the Westminster Bridge attack in which multiple people died on the bridge, and then that police officer, Keith Palmer, died at the Palace of Westminster as well. You then had the Manchester Arena bombing, you had the Borough Market attack. It was just the most horrific year. And there is a real concern that because of world events, and, you know, Gaza is a particular issue that really has the police and security services quite exercised, because they are seeing an uptick in the potential threats facing the UK and other European countries because of that. There have already been attacks that have been linked or motivated by those that support, Hamas and what has been happening in Gaza, and not supporting what has been happening in Gaza, but responding to what has been happening in Gaza. And there is real concern now that other people motivated and radicalised by that could be willing to enact that. I should always add the caveat here: we don't know the motivation of this individual, or whether it will even at the end of the day turn out to be terrorism. But that's why people, Penny, want to know quickly that it either was or wasn't a terrorism attack and who it can be attributed to, because given what happened at the synagogue just very recently up in Manchester as well, it could denote a very worrying period that we're entering into. And you're right about what was happening, Penny, on that train. What I'm now piecing together from very consistent eyewitness reports is that it seems to have happened towards the rear of the train itself, with screams that were heard and shouting that was heard from those rear carriages. And then people, Stephen and Penny, people running through the train shouting that someone had a knife, people covered in blood, and then understandably you were asking where do you hide, and you can't really. You just push up towards the front of the train, which is what the vast majority of people on that train, if they could, did. Others locked themselves in the toilets of the train until it pulled into the station at Huntingdon. It just, I mean, even just trying to contemplate the absolute horror that these passengers were subjected to, it's just spine-chilling.
Well, it is. But as you pointed out, Mark, there are so many unanswered questions at the moment. Why do you think it is that we've not been given the basic information of even just nationality of these suspects who've been arrested?
Well, it's certainly a question that I think is an important question. Perhaps, with the just giving the police the benefit here, it has unfolded overnight. Their first priority is, of course, to deal with the ongoing and evolving incident. These people are just in custody at the moment, so I would imagine throughout today, those questions will be even more difficult for the police if we are in the same position, say 4 or 5 o'clock today, that we're in now, and don't know kind of key details like that, particularly what the police think unfolded here. Was it an act of criminality? Was it a row that got out of hand? I mean, it just seems so unlikely that it could have been anything like that, because even a fight systematically going through individual after individual that didn't appear to have anything to do with anything, you know, just a man trying to protect a young girl that got stabbed as well. It doesn't appear to be that. So you're looking at some kind of motivated attack, but is it motivated by an ideology? Is it motivated by, you know, some other reason? I hate to use the word mental health, because our audience understandably just get right on and say this is the excuse that we always have. But the fact is, there are some sick individuals out there that do act because they are disturbed, not right in the head at some point. So, you know, let's wait and see what the authorities say. But the answer, if that's what their thinking is, they need to get out there, I think, and tell us, because it is that concern that you highlighted there, Stephen, in the wider community, just not knowing if there is a wider threat. I mean, I note that the statements that I've seen thus far, I don't think suggest that there's no wider threat. They just talk about 2 people being quickly arrested. So let's see what they say when everybody wakes up, when daylight occurs, and people can just kind of gather the narrative to put out into the public sphere at that point.
Mark, thank you very much. Also, the fact that it's 2 men who've been arrested does perhaps lean away from the fact that it's people who have mental health issues. So just a reminder then, this was the train that was from Doncaster to London King's Cross, and it left Peterborough station at 7:30. And then the first 999 call was made 9 minutes later. And then more than 30 officers were sent to the scene, and it pulled into the first available, the emergency cord was pulled, and it pulled into the first available station, which was Huntingdon. We've got Norman Brennan, former London police officer, director of Law and Order Foundation, with us now. We've been told, we've heard from Mark there, that the first thing that happens after these men were arrested, the first thing that would have happened to them is that they would have made sure that they actually had somewhere to sleep, so that the defence lawyers in the future could not accuse the police of having interviewed them whilst they were tired. What are your thoughts today?
Well, that will be the case. I mean, my thoughts today are the same as all the other police contributors and your fine selves, is that 9 people are fighting for their lives. There are 9 families that are outside intensive care units or outside an operating theatre, praying that their loved one will survive. In relation to suspects, yes, under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, they're all entitled to have their rests and their breaks and seek consultation with a lawyer. That is what everyone's right is. But the priority at this moment in time is for the police to ensure that next of kin have been advised, that they can gain all the evidence that they need, all the forensics. They've had to deal with dozens of witnesses, and many of these witnesses, as Peter Blexley said a bit earlier on, would have been traumatised. And taking a statement from somebody that's traumatised is not something that you rush. And sometimes you may even have to delay taking a statement.
I mean, look, it's clear, Norman, that we and everyone watching and listening, we want answers. Of course we do. And perhaps there are some basic things that the police could be telling us that they haven't done just yet. However, I mean, as you point out, I mean, this is a gargantuan task, isn't it, for the police involved?
It is. I think what's happened here, Steve, I've listened to all the contributors last night and all this morning, is we need to step back a bit and ask ourselves, is this going to happen again? Could it happen again? I posted over the last year or two several times on social media, when I see the attacks in France, over in Europe, police officers being stabbed to death. Now, one of the weapons of choice at the moment of terrorists, and as you rightly say, this hasn't been deemed so, but there's a very good chance it is. The weapon of choice is a knife, is a car, van, a lorry. And we saw in London Bridge in 2017 a van was hired. They wanted a 3.5 tonner, so more people could have been killed. 8 tragically were killed, 48 were injured. That is the devastation that a single person, or in that particular case, 3 people, caused, Stephen. Now, one person can go to any railway station in Britain, can go to any shopping centre in Britain. We've got coming up Christmas fairs all over the country. And it's right and proper that whilst we're talking about what's happened today, we do everything that we can possibly to protect ourselves and our family and our community. When the public see a couple of armed response officers walking at a Christmas fair, I saw a couple of people whinging about it last year. Why are armed officers walking the streets of the Christmas fair? It should be Christmassy. You're right, it should be Christmassy. They're there for your safety. Would you prefer to have 2 armed officers there? God forbid somebody taped knives to their hands or drove into a crowd and started killing people. I think I would welcome armed officers.
I think the problem is, isn't it, Norman, is that we don't live in a police state, and we want to actually not succumb to the feeling of being terrified when it is a terrorist incident. We don't know whether this is or isn't a terrorist incident at the moment. But every time we have any incident like this, we are always told that we need to carry on, perhaps be extra vigilant as we were. I mean, I started my journalistic career pretty much when the Troubles were upon us, and I don't think there was a train I went on or a bus I went on or frankly any public transport that I went on where if there was a bag without somebody who owned it, sometimes I got off. Sometimes I got off at the next station or tried to get off or move away from it or whatever. So, you know, unfortunately, it does mean every time that we have something like this, it does mean that we do change our behaviour a bit, don't we?
We can't give up and we can't give in. As dreadful as life is, as dreadful as wars are, we always have to pick ourselves up and work together, move together. The only thing that we can do is to look around us, be aware. I remember being out with an anti-terrorist squad friend of mine, and he said, Norman, he said, are you there?
Yeah, no, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, he said to me, the people we worry about the most are not necessarily those that are on our radar because we're actually watching them. We're keeping an eye on them. Bearing in mind there's up to 40,000 people, it's the worst ones. He said the people that we're concerned about are the children, the ones that self-radicalise and could leave their home. We don't even know anything about them, travel into London, get a car and kill and maim people. That is the world we live in. We live in a world where people can self-radicalise. There's so much anger, there's so much hatred, and sometimes that anger and hatred causes people to go out and try and maim and murder as many people for the moronic cause that people have.
Forgive me, Norman, but as you are the director of the Law and Order Foundation, how do we even begin to tackle that? Because that's a huge problem. I mean, that is a massive problem in and of itself. On top of the fact we do already appear to have a knife crime epidemic, and that appears to be increasing across parts of the country as well. So, from your perspective, from your organisation, how do we even begin to tackle it?
You're right, I've been a lead knife campaigner in Britain for 35 years, 15 whilst I was a serving police officer. Myself faced a life-threatening assault, and I saw my colleagues and the public facing it. If you want to know my answer, you're absolutely right. Sadly, I've got to tell you, and I've said it before, the streets of Britain are all but lawless. We have a type of anarchy. And what do we need, Stephen? Probably 20,000 minimum more police officers. We want police officers to flood the streets of Britain. We want police officers to talk to the public, to talk to victims, attend calls, take statements, investigate crimes, go and meet shopkeepers, walk the streets in such numbers that the public feels safe. The public feels safe and confident enough to talk to the police and to tell us about people like they did 40 or 50 years ago to the street bobby. I saw a chummy boy the other day meeting somebody else. They were in a car. I overheard this, or I've heard a rumour. And that could give us the intelligence and the ability to go and tackle these individuals and possibly save lives. We have got absolute chaos on the streets of Britain across all spectres of crime. We need certainly 20,000 new police officers. We're not going to get them. We're just going to be given basically froth and no substance. After today, Steve, are we just going to wait for the next attack and murders by whoever it wished to carry out such acts?
Very much for talking to us this morning, Norman Brennan, former London police officer and director of Law and Order Foundation.
Let's talk to the local MP for Huntingdon, someone you'll know from this studio many times before he was elected, Ben Abesijekti. Good to see you once again, Ben. I mean, what a tragedy that we're having to talk to you under these circumstances this morning.
It's a real tragedy, and wake up this morning, having been here till the early hours of last night as well, it really hits home that this was such a tragic incident, and that so many lives have been potentially shattered off the back of it. Thinking this morning and seeing the devastation when I arrived last evening, it really is shocking that something could happen in a place like this. This isn't an incident that any area is used to, least of all an area like Huntingdon.
Ben, can you tell us what you can see from where you are there?
So I'm actually stood in the car park opposite the station. So the train you can see behind me is the LNER train that was en route.
I think we might have actually lost the link for just a moment. Oh, you're back again, Ben.
Ben's back again.
Sorry, I'm back. Sorry, my phone, as you can imagine, is ringing ringing all the time. So the train behind me is the train in question. It was the train from Doncaster to King's Cross. The area behind me was the incident response area on the other side of the station, and the A1307 is still closed. But when I arrived last night, there must have been 20 to 30 police cars, around 10 ambulances and multiple fire engines as well. So I pay credit to the emergency services, who did an incredible job working interagency to bring the situation under control. The response time was just a few minutes, and I'd like to pay credit to the local response officers, the officers that you might see on a town centre on Saturday night, who were actually the first officers on the scene shortly before the armed officers turned up, and they came to the scene of devastation and started to deal with it. So credit to those officers. I know that. Sorry, Karen.
No, but I mean, we say it time and time again when there are these sort of horrific things, Ben, but the idea that this has happened in a place like Huntingdon, I mean, I know it was on the train, that's the first station it's been able to get to, but nevertheless, I mean, what an indictment, actually, as to where we are at the moment.
It really is, and the fact that a place like this, which is semi-rural Cambridgeshire, could be brought into scope of what is potentially a mass casualty incident, and we don't yet know the motive for the attack, but it is something that is incredibly serious. And whatever the motives were, 10 people have been left injured, 9 of those seriously with life-threatening injuries. And for that to happen somewhere like this means that this isn't happening in a big city centre. It's something that we should be mindful of, and we should all be vigilant at all times.
Yeah, I mean, just as you say it, your thoughts, your heart goes out to those people who are even now at ICU or outside waiting for surgery to be finished. It is just unbelievable. We do know that earlier on, when it was in darkness, we were looking at pictures of lots of people in the coveralls. There were dogs at one point searching. Has all that gone away now? Can you see from there whether all of whether that has, or maybe it's spread out a bit, maybe it's coming toward, maybe it's actually on the way towards you? But that's what we were talking about from last night, after about sort of 8 o'clock, I think, is when all of that activity was happening. Has that seemed to have moved away slightly?
Certainly, the scenes you can see on the screen were what greeted me when I arrived last night. I got here shortly after 9 p.m. And was here through to midnight, by which point a lot of the police response had moved away. This morning, it looks, other than the fact that the main road is shut, it looks very quiet. The station's obviously cordoned off with police tape, and there are officers making sure that no one can get closer to the scene. But it is quite quiet. There are just a handful of police cars and officers just continuing to man the scene and to clear up. The train is still here. Presumably there is forensics that still needs to be done. I'm not clear when that train will move. But it's a much quieter scene than it was last night. But last night was a truly horrific scene.
I mean, as you say, there's going to be some forensic work still ongoing. There's a criminal investigation underway. At some point, there is going to be a legal process. But this also has to be looked at on the whole by parliamentarians like yourself. This needs to be a full cross-party issue, doesn't it? You all need to work together on this to try and find out, I mean, not exactly why this has happened, but how we at least try to stop things like this happening in this country again.
I think absolutely in terms of it being a cross-party issue. I was here last night. I spoke to Andrew Pace, who's the Member of Parliament for Peterborough, who's Labour, just to let him know what I knew and the potential that some of his constituents could have been on the train at that point. The train wasn't actually due to stop in Huntingdon. It was due to go from Peterborough straight to, I believe, Stevenage. And so this was an unscheduled stop. But it was important to work cross-party. I've had messages from members across the House. And so everybody, I think, is united in wanting to work to get to the bottom of what occurred and so prevent it from ever happening again.
And what would you say to people who are travelling today then?
In terms of travelling today, I think people should be confident that the rail network is safe. The train behind, I'm not quite sure what impact this will have on services on the East Coast Main Line. It is more than one track, so but I've not seen any other trains come through here since I arrived this morning. So I anticipate that there probably will be delays, and that people should probably look to make alternative arrangements if they're planning to travel in this direction.
I mean, you mentioned earlier your support for those people, particularly the first responders, in all of this, which I find very interesting, Ben, because obviously you served in the military, you did a tour of Afghanistan. I mean, you're someone who is more aware than most of us of some of the horrors that can be seen by people on the front line.
Absolutely. I know that the first officers were response officers, then armed officers. I actually spoke to Simon Meggick, who's the Chief Constable of Cambridgeshire Constabulary, last night at around midnight, and he was able to tell me that they'd actually trained for an Operation Plato incident in the past week or so. And so this will have been fresh in the memories or fresh in the minds of officers who were responding, and it's obviously terrible that they've had to put those skills into effect so quickly, but it is reassuring to know that this is something that they were trained for, and so putting those skills into effect has potentially saved lives. I know that paramedics were on the scene as well, and that what greeted them was potentially a quite horrific sight. So my thoughts are with the first responders, but they did a fantastic job of bringing the situation under control.
Yes, and we're saying our hearts go out to those who are in hospital and to their families as well, but also to those people who were caught up in this and who were spending Saturday evening either going home or going out, and who now will find it very difficult. I mean, you do wonder about how this affects you afterwards. As Stephen was saying, that you've been in this situation. You've been in this situation where the adrenaline's pumping. But afterwards, I do know people, for example, who've been caught up in incidents who find it very, very difficult to actually move on.
I think with any incident like this, the effect that it will have on you, whilst you may not realise at the time with the adrenaline coursing, but you will benefit from speaking to somebody afterwards. There will be individuals who are caught up in this who potentially witnessed some terrible events, who will need counselling or a form of counselling or to be able to talk this through with people. I think that's worth bearing in mind, that beyond just the victims who are now sadly in hospital, there are other victims who will bear mental scars from what they've seen and what they've experienced last night on the train. So I do hope that we're able to make sure that all of the people who are working on this, victims of this, are able to seek the help that they need, and even just in terms of those who've been caught up in this, who still don't really know what was going on. It's quite a long train. That if you weren't in the carriages that were affected, then potentially you're not entirely sure what went on at all. So there will be lots of people involved in this who need to be spoken to, and I'm just very glad that the situation was brought under control so quickly.
Yeah, Ben or Bessie Jekti, we appreciate your time. We know it's going to be a very busy weeks ahead for you now, dealing with the aftermath of this and looking after your constituents who've been affected by this, and we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Yes, politicians have been reacting to the mass stabbing in Huntingdon. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has tweeted on X and said, "My thoughts are with all those affected and my thanks go to the emergency services for their response. Anyone in the area should follow the advice of the police." Well,
the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, urged people not to speculate on exactly what's going on. Last night she said, "I'm deeply saddened to hear about the stabbings. My thoughts go out to all those affected. 2 suspects have been immediately arrested and taken into custody. I am getting regular updates on the investigation."
The Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, said that she was deeply disturbed by the reports emerging from Huntingdon. "This is an absolutely horrific attack and my thoughts are with all those affected, including the emergency responders at the scene."
Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Lib Dems, said he was horrified by the reports coming out of Huntingdon. "My thoughts," he said, "are with those hurt and everyone who witnessed it. Thank you to the emergency services on the scene."
And the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, that's Richard Tice, echoed that and said, "Deeply concerned as reports emerge of the horrific incident at Huntingdon. Our thoughts and prayers are with those affected and our thanks go to the emergency response teams."
It's interesting. I mean, the Home Secretary saying don't speculate on anything. And look, I understand the sentiment. The problem we have with this is we've had no details of the suspects released at all, which was something which the police themselves said they needed to do more.
And it is 12 hours now, kind of pretty much. Well, what time is it now? It's 7:30. So the train left at 7:30, 7:40. Yeah, 7:40 p.m. It is 12 hours now since the first calls came through.
Yeah, and we do, you know, it's about the speculation, isn't it? It is about the speculation is problematic. It was problematic in Southport, and what we don't want is for that to happen again, and a little bit more information may help that. Let's talk to Surrey Police and Crime Commissioner Kevin Hurley. We appreciate your time this morning, Kevin. I mean, what's your take on this? Do you think we're expecting even that most basic of information too soon, or should we have had that overnight?
Well, having been in policing for nearly 40 years, one way or another, my take on this is simple, and it never changes when I see these incidents. Weren't we lucky? I don't think anyone has worked out yet that Huntingdon Railway Station is 100 metres away from Cambridgeshire Police Headquarters, where the armed response teams, the investigative teams, are all based, and less than 100 metres away from Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue. So, bearing in mind this happened in a rural county, it couldn't have happened from a point of view of response in a more perfect situation. So, first of all, I'd like to bury this self-congratulation of didn't our responders do well? Yes, they always did. But the reality is, if that train had stopped at a different station, it could have taken up to half an hour, 40 minutes for armed police to respond, and many more people would have been killed. And it yet again emphasises the absolute stupidity that we still think it's okay in this country to have most of our officers not able to protect us because they don't carry firearms. So that's my first point there, Stephen. I wouldn't want to lose that, but we should remember that in a similar incident at London Bridge, an unarmed, again, British Transport Police officer took on 3 people and delayed them sufficiently for, fortunately, patrolling City of London police officers who were very near, literally minutes away, to turn up. If this was anywhere else in the country, the carnage would have been far greater. But returning to your earlier point, Stephen, we just don't know when this is going to happen next. We don't know what's behind it. Of course, if one hears it's one person arrested, one tends to think it's either going to be, frankly, a mentally disordered person, perhaps suffering from cannabis psychosis or something similar, because, of course, we still go through this nonsense of saying that cannabis is not harmful to a lot of people. Or it could have, of course, been a lone terrorist attacker, generally with Islamist-based views. In this case, because we've got two people arrested, again, it's conjecture, but it tends to make one think perhaps this is a little bit of an organised conspiracy with two people. And I won't jump the gun, but we all know what we're thinking.
Yeah.
So the sooner...
We're having slight problems, actually, Kevin, we're having slight problems with your link, but do want to actually just get your thoughts. We've got a map which we can show, showing Huntingdon train station, which is, as you said, where the train the train pulled into, rather than leaving it immediately. The emergency cord was pulled, rather than leaving it in the middle of nowhere. It did pull into Huntingdon station, and we can see just how close the emergency services are. And as you say, that does mean that all these terrified people were able to get off the train, rather than being forced to just either sit on this train as it went further along, or actually stopped in the middle of nowhere, and where it would have been more difficult to get the emergency services to them.
Yeah, well, more important, it meant that with a relatively short time, police officers with taser and firearms were able to stop them. Because, as you just said, if this had stopped anywhere else, even in a large town on the way down the line, where there wouldn't have been armed response officers and possibly no taser-equipped officers, who knows what the carnage would have really looked like. And it just once again emphasises this point of how lucky we are all the time, because we still believe Dixon of Dock Green is a good idea. Everyone forgets, of course, that Dixon of Dock Green in the original film, The Blue Light, was shot dead by a criminal.
It is such a worrying situation, Kevin, isn't it? I mean, what do we do to... I mean, as you say, we look at the draw with this one, that we had so many relevant and important responders very close by. But what do we do in terms of where we are with our police response and police numbers and things at the moment? Because people are going to be scared, rightly or wrongly, at the moment. What do we need to see happen within the police?
We need to see significant investment to repair the damage that the Conservative Party under Cameron and Theresa May did to policing response in terms of numbers, training, expertise and retention of staff, on the first point. And secondly, as I keep on saying, move away from this blue sky, high, lovely world view that we should not have armed police. We are literally almost the only country in the world now that doesn't arm our response police. Even New Zealand, Sleepy Hollow, New Zealand, puts rifles and pistols in the response cars. It's us, Iceland and Southern Ireland, that doesn't arm police anymore. It's quite ridiculous, and we will continue to periodically see dreadful atrocities where police are unable to stop random attackers, whether they are terrorist-driven or they're mentally ill, because they can't act decisively with a firearm. I mean, bottom line, the police need a significant boost to retain the skilled people, and we need to invest in response that can deal decisively with these situations. But on top of that, of course, these police firearms officers and those who carry tasers actually are a minority, because they're prepared to do the job, because they do so in the knowledge that not only they could be badly hurt or shot themselves, but also they face years and years of investigation and potentially standing trial in the Old Bailey, or being dismissed, as we see one case after another of where the Independent Office of Police Conduct, which is far from independent, incidentally, decides to pillory these officers. And even when they're acquitted by a jury of 12 people within a few minutes, they still insist on having an internal discipline inquiry. We're very lucky.
I was
we saw earlier on.
I was going to say, Kevin, I mean, although a lot of people may well agree with your argument of saying it's time that we had at least more arms available, the problem is it would require an entire readjustment of the system. I mean, armed police officers, when there's a shooting that turns out, as they mainly do, to be justified, they're often arrested at the scene straight afterwards, aren't they? And as you say, they're put on leave and investigated for months at a time. That has to change.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, it's quite right that all police use of force should be investigated and, if inappropriate, held to account. But we've currently got a situation where, in the most recent case, if you remember, where the career criminal rammed his police cars into vehicles in Streatham and was shot dead. The lovely guy who beat his girlfriend up had an injunction. The police officer in that case was charged with murder. The jury acquitted him within about 3 or 4 minutes. And then the Independent Office of Police Conduct still insisted that there was a discipline hearing. And fortunately, Sir Mark Rowley has come out very strongly in opposing this kind of behaviour. But the bottom line on this, Mark, is if we are serious about having police officers who are able to protect us from what we know this is a growing threat, whether or not we're prepared to deal with it or not. We've got hundreds of thousands of people in our country now. We don't know who they are or where they come from. A lot of them have third world values, and a lot of them have extremist Islamic views. And therefore, we know this threat is growing. Let us get real. Let us put ourselves in a position.
We should stress, though, Kevin, that we have not been told that this is a terrorist incident at the moment.
Of course. But I'm talking in general terms about what we know is the overall threat to the UK. As I started off saying, these could be mentally disordered people, or these could be terrorist-driven people. My point is, we have been very lucky in the past. Except for those poor people who've been killed or stabbed when these incidents occurred. The fact is, when you're walking down, going in your shopping centre or on your train going to work one morning, don't be surprised if the police take a long time to turn up with a decisive response, because the fact of the matter is, too many of our police officers still attend incidents bravely unarmed. If we look at the case in Hainault recently, the chap going around killing the poor schoolboy with a samurai sword, unarmed police had to take that guy on with a samurai sword after he'd already killed someone, and then he chopped a police inspector's hand off. What world are senior police decision makers and politicians living in when they expect to send young, inexperienced policemen and women forward to protect us? It is the classic case of lions led by donkeys.
Kevin, thank you very much for your input this morning. That is Kevin Hurley there.
Right, let's just run you through what we know so far on this breaking news. And counter-terrorism police are leading the investigation into that mass stabbing on board a train. 10 people stabbed, 9 still have life-threatening injuries.
British Transport Police say 2 people have been arrested in connection with the attack, which happened on a service between Peterborough and London.
Eyewitnesses reported scenes of panic, one describing a man waving a large knife as passengers fled from the carriages.
Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said his thoughts are with all those affected and praised the emergency services for their swift response.
Let's talk to the Mayor of Peterborough in Cambridgeshire, Paul Bristow, who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. How do you even begin, as Mayor of this region, to deal with not only what has happened, but what is yet to come and how people are going to be affected by this?
Well, it's truly a horrendous incident, and I know local people in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, their thoughts will be with everyone impacted. And before I just comment, I just want to commend the emergency services for everything that they've done last night and continue to do, and also LNER train staff as well, who did an amazing job under really horrendous circumstances, being able to pull into Huntingdon Station, because it would have been appalling. It's in a controlled environment, isn't it? So there was no way to get on and off the train. So to have the mind to stop at Huntingdon was the right thing to do, and that undoubtedly saved many, many people.
Yes, and as you say, it's for everyone who's been impacted, not only the people who who've actually been injured and are fighting for their lives in the hospital, those 9 with life-threatening injuries, but also anybody else who was caught up in this. And one can only imagine the terror on board this train as these people came through. We don't know whether both of them were carrying knives. It seems to be that perhaps was just one carrying a knife. Nevertheless, utterly terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just worth keeping in mind that in the main, the train was travelling through Cambridgeshire. It obviously had to stop at Huntingdon. It wasn't scheduled to stop at Huntingdon, but local people will be concerned that this is able to happen on their doorstep, and they'll want reassurance. And that's why when I talk to the authorities today, I've been suggesting, and the government, of course, I've been suggesting that there is controlled release of information, but in an open and transparent way, because that's the way to reassure people, I think, after such a horrendous incident.
Can you explain what you mean by controlled release of information, would you?
Well, it needs to be open and transparent. I think that's fine. But we've also got to make sure that the relatives of those impacted are informed first, because there'll be lots of people there who perhaps don't know their relatives have been caught up in such an incident. But I think people can be trusted with the right information. I think people can be trusted. So that's why it should be open and transparent, but obviously controlled at the same time.
Yeah, I think there were even air ambulance. I think air ambulance were involved on the site, ambulance police. It was such a major operation to get those victims from Huntingdon Station to the hospital. So the hospital, I think, Addenbrooke's is around about half an hour's drive away, I believe.
Yeah, so Huntingdon's about halfway between both Addenbrooke's and Peterborough City Hospital. Addenbrooke's is a major tertiary centre, I think, for trauma, as is Peterborough as well. So it's about halfway between both of those hospitals. I would imagine if it's air ambulance, most would have gone to Addenbrooke's, you're right.
So what's your position? I mean, where does this leave you, Mr. Mayor, this morning? I mean, you say you're talking to the emergency services. I mean, there's got to be, actually, talk about a busy day and busy weeks ahead for you in terms of collating information, but also sort of cross-cooperation with everyone involved in your area, plus national government.
Well, that's right. So today's obviously going to be a day where we will reflect on what's happened. We can talk about, how we let the public know exactly what's happened in that open and transparent way. I think that's really, really important. And we've got to learn the lessons of all this. And obviously the train was travelling in the main through Cambridgeshire. It wasn't scheduled to stop at Huntingdon. It did so because it was the right place to stop, or the quickest place to stop, to get the emergency services on the scene and, of course, the perpetrator arrested. But look, we have to learn the lessons of what was a truly horrific incident.
Also hearing of some acts of heroism too, because we've heard of an older man blocking the attacker from stabbing a younger girl. That's according to one eyewitness, as the obviously people panicking as bleeding victims called out for help.
Well, none of us know how we would react in these circumstances, and it seems to me that everyday people are capable of extraordinary things. And the gentleman you refer to protect a young girl like that, I mean, I hope when all things come to light that he's okay. That's the first thing, because I understand he's got injuries to his neck and his head, but hopefully he's recognised for what he did. We're all capable of extraordinary things, and none of us know how we will react in such horrific circumstances.
It's about reassurance now moving forward, though, isn't it, for members of the public? I mean, it's going to be very difficult to do when we don't yet know what the motive is behind this. The charges haven't been laid. Of course, it's far too early for all of that. But it's going to be very difficult with that void of information, some of it which is necessary, but it is going to be difficult to reassure people, isn't it?
Well, it is. And as I said to you, the train was just travelling through Cambridgeshire. It wasn't scheduled to stop at Huntingdon. But local people will be understandably concerned that this sort of incident could happen on their doorstep. And anyone intending to travel by train, I mean, this is the first type of incident I think we've ever seen on a train, which is an enclosed environment. A very difficult environment to control because it's moving and you can't simply open the doors or anything. So, you know, that's understandable. But that's why I think, as I say, a controlled but open and transparent release of information is the best way. I think people can be trusted with information. I mean, I know everyone's a journalist now on social media, etc., and there'll be lots of speculation. But that's why I think it's really important to release that information in an open and transparent way.
Yes, I mean, as you say, the point is that, well, as Shabana Mahmood has said, you know, I urge people to avoid comment and speculation at this early stage. The problem is, of course, it's all very well and good urging people to avoid comment and speculation, but you can't help it because we have been in, or we have seen terrorist incidents. We have also seen incidents with people with mental health issues. So very, very difficult not to speculate because that's what we do.
Yeah, well, as I say, everyone's a journalist now with social media, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because people are able to share information and get their views across, but that's the nature of the world that we live in. But the authorities have to respond to this, and obviously in a controlled way, because we want to make sure relatives and are informed and no information comes forth that can jeopardise any potential legal implications going forward. But I think people can be trusted with information as long as it's done in an open and transparent way.
OK. Paul Bristow, Mr Mayor, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate your time this morning. It's going to be busy for all the local authorities in this area at the moment. I mean, we're saying we don't know anything about the suspects at the moment, we don't. But also we know very little about those people who've been injured in this, apart from to say we know there were 10. We understand they are all being treated, as we understand it, in Addenbrooke's in Cambridge, and we know that 9 of them are in a life-threatening condition. So you've just got to hope and pray, and indeed for all those people in the hospital who've been working on them, that they are able to pull everybody through this. But for them, obviously horrific. For their families, who are waiting, and as one of our guests said earlier, you know, waiting outside operating theatres, waiting outside intensive care. What a horrific time for them.
Yeah, Saturday night. Just to recap, yes, it was the 1825 service from Doncaster to King's Cross, and then it left Peterborough at 7:30. First emergency calls were at 7:42, I think, or 7:40, somewhere around that. And then there were these emergency responders who immediately went to this scene at Huntingdon Station, which is in Cambridgeshire, where the train, which was not scheduled to stop, stopped so that the first responders could get there, because it is much easier to get to a place where there's actually a station rather than actually if the emergency cord's pulled and it stops in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, they do try to sort of keep going till the next station, don't they? For those, you know, pretty other reasons. Yeah. It's very difficult actually to get out of a train. You don't realise how far off the ground they are till you see one out of a station. But what a horrific, totally horrific situation, and a lot of praise for those first responders, seeing things that you would never want to see. Yeah. You would absolutely never want to see, and their very quick response, let's hope that has directly saved some lives in all of this, and we have to be thankful that arrests were quickly made so that at least the police can begin their work now as well.
Yes, and what started out as a pretty normal Saturday evening for people going to and from wherever they were going to on that train.
Well, it is 8 o'clock here on GB News, and that breaking news overnight is that 9 people are fighting for their lives in hospital after that mass stabbing on a train in Cambridgeshire.
Police have declared a major incident, and counter-terrorist officers are investigating the attack in which 10 passengers were attacked.
2 men were arrested at Huntingdon Station by armed police shortly before 8 o'clock.
Well, the Chief Superintendent of the British Transport Police, Chris Casey, says that this was a shocking incident and they are conducting urgent inquiries to establish what is happening here at Huntingdon Station this morning. The police investigations continue.
Witnesses say that passengers hid in the lavatories to avoid the assailants, with others describing scenes of pure chaos and saying it was like something from a film.
Well, the politicians have been reacting, I mean, understandably so, in such a major incident. The Prime Minister says that the appalling incident in Cambridgeshire is deeply concerning. And earlier, we spoke to the local MP who's telling us just how difficult and upsetting this whole situation is.
This morning, forensic teams have been seen on the site scouring the tracks near the train.
Well, we're keeping you fully up to date with this situation. It has just gone 8 o'clock. I'm Stephen Dixon.
I'm Penny Smith, and this is GB News Breakfast.
Well, just to recap then and bring you fully up to date if you're just joining us at 8 this morning, Counter-terrorism police are now leading the investigation into a mass stabbing event on board a train last night. It's left 9 people with life-threatening injuries.
British Transport Police say 2 people have been arrested in connection with the attack, which happened on a service between Peterborough and London.
Eyewitnesses reported scenes of absolute panic, one describing a man waving a large knife as passengers fled from carriage to carriage.
In a statement, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, said his thoughts were with all those affected, and he praised emergency services for their swift response.
Well, it is clearly a moving situation. Let's get the very latest on it now from the scene and our national reporter, Jack Carson. Morning, Jack.
Yeah, good morning to you both. We'll just recall some of what you were saying there, the British Transport Police statement that was released last night, saying that they were called at 7:42 yesterday to reports of a multiple stabbing on board the 6:25 train service from Doncaster to London's King's Cross, making an emergency stop here at the station where armed police were then able, from Cambridgeshire Police, were then able to board that train, and they say arrest 2 people in connection with the incident, and they this morning remain in police custody, being questioned particularly, of course, around their motivations, because 10 people were taken to hospital last night. 9 it is said believed to be suffering from life-threatening injuries, 1 being treated for non-life-threatening injuries, and as it stands from the information we have at the moment, there have been no fatalities so far. Now, of course, this has been declared a major incident by the British Transport Police, and we know that the Counter-terrorism Police are involved in this investigation. The British Transport Police statement last night saying that the Counter-terrorism Police were supporting their investigation while they work to establish the full circumstances for the motivations around this incident. Just to bring you some words from the Chief Superintendent from the British Transport Police, Chris Casey, saying this is a shocking incident first and foremost, and their thoughts are with those who have been injured. They say they are conducting urgent inquiries. We have seen that very actively over the past 24 hours or so, over the past a few hours or so into the night, particularly around investigators we saw using torches to look under the train, both here at the end of the train and all along the platform as well. And of course, this morning, those police investigations do continue. Chris Casey saying that it could take some time before they are in a position to confirm anything further, and they say it would not be appropriate at this stage to speculate on any causes of the incident. And eyewitnesses talking about the harrowing scenes that were on that train last night, particularly one gentleman called Ollie Foster, saying that everyone essentially ran to the back of the train. Everyone was screaming, trying to run, people trying to explain that there was somebody stabbing everyone and everything. He said that at first he thought it was a joke, some kind of day after Halloween prank, but it was very quickly became very real, just how dangerous that train had become and just how dangerous the incident exactly was. Reports of people trying to use anything they can to possibly defend themselves, including a Jack Daniels whiskey bottle. The East of England ambulance service saying that they were called at 7:38 p.m. to reports that multiple people had been stabbed on a train. They say they mobilised a large-scale response to the Huntingdon railway station where we are this morning. They say that included numerous ambulances, tactical commanders and a hazardous area response team, including critical care teams and the East Anglian Air Ambulance, as well as bringing in resources from other areas. So they also brought in the Essex and Herts Air Ambulance and Magpus Air Ambulance as well, and they confirmed that they had transported multiple people to hospital last night. And as we got from that statement a little bit later yesterday evening, 9 people remain in hospital this morning in a life-threatening condition. You read that there that the Prime Minister had called this an appalling incident, saying that his thoughts were those affected, and he called it deeply concerning. The leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, saying that she was also deeply disturbed by the reports coming out from Huntington, calling this a horrific attack, and that her thoughts were with all of those affected, including the emergency responders at the scene. The Home Secretary saying that she was deeply saddened, and she said that she was receiving regular updates on the investigation. Those investigations, of course, continuing here at the train station this morning, but she was saying that she urged people to avoid comment and speculation at this early stage. But of course, you know, the harrowing eyewitness accounts that we have seen and heard from those people that were on the train just shows how horrific this attack was and how people very much felt like they could not escape this. The train, of course, arriving into Huntington station as soon as possible, the police responding to that event as soon as possible, and as I was saying, armed police eventually being able to board the train and arrest those 2 suspects who this morning remain in custody.
Jack, thank you very much. That's our national reporter, Jack Carson. Well, we spoke earlier to Ben Obesi-Ejekti, the MP for Huntingdon, and he was just right on the side with the train in the background. This is what he had to say.
It's a real tragedy, and wake up this morning, having been here till the early hours of last night as well, it really hits home that this was such a tragic incident, and that so many lives have been potentially shattered from off the back of it. Thinking this morning and seeing the devastation when I arrived last evening, it really is shocking that something could happen in a place like this. This isn't an incident that any area is used to, least of all an area like Huntingdon. The train behind me is the train in question. It was the train from Doncaster to King's Cross. The area behind me was the incident response area on the other side of the station, and the A1307 is still closed. But when I arrived last night, there must have been 20 to 30 police cars, around 10 ambulances and multiple fire engines as well. So I pay credit to the emergency services who did an incredible job working interagency to bring the situation under control. The response time was just a few minutes, and I'd like to pay credit to the local response officers, the officers that you might see on a town centre on Saturday night, who were actually the first officers on the scene shortly before the armed officers turned up. And they came to the scene of devastation and started to deal with it. So credit to those officers. The fact that a place like this, which is semi-rural Cambridgeshire, could be brought into scope of you know what is potentially a mass casualty incident, and we don't yet know the motive for the attack, but it is something that is incredibly serious. And whatever the motives were, 10 people have been left injured, 9 of those seriously with life-threatening injuries. And for that to happen somewhere like this means that you know, this isn't happening in a big city centre, and it's something that we should be mindful of, and we should all be vigilant at all times. I got here shortly after 9 p.m. And was here through to midnight, by which point a lot of the police response had moved away. This morning it looks, other than the fact that the main road is shut, it looks very quiet. The station's obviously cordoned off with police tape, and there are officers making sure that no one can get closer to the scene. But it is quite quiet. There are just a handful of police cars and officers just continuing to man the scene and to clear up. The train is still here. Presumably there is forensics that still needs to be done. I'm not clear when that train will move. But it's a much quieter scene than it was last night. But last night was truly a horrific scene. It was important to work cross-party. I've had messages from members across the House, and so everybody I think is united in wanting to work to get to the bottom of what occurred and to prevent it from ever happening again.
Yeah, Ben Obesi-Ejekti, the local MP, newly elected last time round, of course, and what he's having to deal with there, because it's not just about, I mean, it's a big job. We spoke to the local mayor as well a little bit earlier on, and this is actually where they've got to pull together, isn't it? Because you've got to deal with the emergency services, all those responding. You stay out of the police investigation, of course, because that's not their business, but they've got to rally all the local troops. They've got to rally their constituents as well, who will be feeling really shocked by all of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And lots of, I've been looking through X, and lots of people just saying, you know, whether or not it's terrorism, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
And that's the point, and that is what they wanted, obviously. I mean, whether or not it was terrorism purposes, nevertheless.
No, it's hitting that definition. I know a lot of people get very angry about it, but it's the definition of whether it falls into terrorism. Counter-terrorism police have taken the lead in the investigation, but it's not been classed as a terrorist event yet. We will keep you fully across everything that's going on. We haven't had any details through yet, but I would be very, very surprised if we don't get a police press conference at some point this morning, and if and when that happens, we'll bring you live coverage here on GB News, of course.
Yeah, live pictures that you're looking at there from Huntingdon Station, and if you were with us a bit earlier, you'll have noticed one big difference I noticed there is that the police in their Socco outfits, their white coveralls, there seems to be, well, we can't see any presence there, but that's because they've moved out. They're moving outwards and expanding the search, perhaps even searching on the train, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be a lot of work for them to do. They'll be looking at a lot of people working on CCTV on board the trains and on board the platforms as well, trying to work out exactly what happened, trying to get a timeline together, trying to pinpoint where the men who were responsible for this, or the people, we don't actually know if they're men either, but whether the people responsible for this, where they got on the train, they hopefully can backtrack them. They just go backwards in time, don't they, following CCTV? It can be a very useful tool. Anyway, look, we were going to keep you fully up to date, but just in the meantime, let's have a very quick check on the weather with Jonathan.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Box Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, a very good morning to you. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Bright and breezy is the theme for many of us throughout today. Breezy because there's a lot of isobars on the chart here, indicating where we've got some quite brisk westerly winds. A few weather fronts lingering around as well, one across the far southeast to begin with, a wet start to the day here, and there's another one just skirting through the northwest of Scotland, providing quite frequent showers. Those could be heavy at times, maybe even with some hail, rumbles of thunder. The wind's strongest up towards the northwest as well. We could see some coastal gales for the Outer Hebrides, the Highlands, and over towards the Northern Isles later on in the day. For elsewhere, though, there will be some sunshine poking its way through at times, and if you manage to see that and you get out of the breeze a bit, it won't feel too bad. Temperatures around 10 to 13 degrees Celsius for most of us. However, the cloud is going to build out towards the west later on in the day, initially for Northern Ireland, and we'll see some longer spells of rain arriving here into the evening. And that cloud and rain is slowly going to progress its way eastwards as we head into the overnight period. Turning quite damp and dreary for many of us. That rain heaviest out towards Western Hills, parts of Erie, the Pennines, getting quite a lot of rain into the start of Monday morning. But with all of that cloud, it's also filtering in some much milder conditions, so many of us will actually be starting off tomorrow morning in double-digit figures. But a lot of cloud on the scene. Those outbreaks of rain will be continuing, again heaviest for some western hills. If you are a little bit further towards the east, you might see a few glimmers of brightness and a touch more shelter. But those winds are going to be strong right across the board. Coastal gales in the most exposed regions. But still, though, coming in from a southwesterly direction means those temperatures are going to be notably above average for the time of year. Most of us around 15 to 16 degrees Celsius. This unsettled and mild theme is looking to continue throughout a good portion of the forthcoming week as well. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Box Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
It's 8:15 and the only news this morning is that horrific attack on board that LNER train last night, pulling in to do an emergency stop at Huntingdon. 10 people attacked by knife, 9 in a critical condition, 2 people have been arrested. Let's get the perspective from Tobias Elwood, former chair of the Defence Select Committee, as you will know. And formerly, in effect, Tobias, you were a first responder at the attack that happened at, on London Bridge, Palace of Westminster, a few years ago, where we sadly lost a police officer. And it feels it's glib, but it's like, here we are again. And there's always the analysis saying, well, we must learn from this, we must try and stop these things from happening again. And yet here we are again.
Yeah, well, good morning. I mean, as you've been reporting, it's too soon to know the details of what's happened leading to this mass casualty event, the motivation, how it unfolded. But a major attack on a British train leading to significant injuries will mean the British public will want to understand that full picture and know what is being done to ensure this tragedy cannot be repeated again. You rightly praised the emergency services who responded in serious numbers and that train driver making the unscheduled stop at Huntingdon. But, I stress, got a lot of details coming to wait for. So I choose my words carefully, and you speak about the first responders to any incident. They are actually the general public, those who are right there at that critical moment. It is not for everyone, but serious threats like this can be closed down or indeed reduced when individuals step forward. You may be able to confront the attacker, yes, or you may be able to shout instructions to reduce panic and confusion or help protect those who are more vulnerable. Such brave actions can prevent escalation and indeed save lives. And of course, any basic first aid training can be put to use. I'm sure we will learn examples of this from what happened on the train last night. But I think more widely, this will prompt another debate about the cult of mostly young male individuals carrying knives and what is being done to assure the public that it is safe to travel on British transport. We all use trains. The nation will be waking up today quite shaken by this and will want to be reassured.
I think that it's interesting, isn't it? Because you ran towards danger on Westminster Bridge. And there have been tales of one particular man, for example, who's quoted, an older man who's quoted as standing in front and protecting a young woman. There is always heroism. But these days, there seems to be, we are more loath to challenge people in general because we worry that they have knives.
You raise such an important social question as to where we are as a society, that we allow even small incidents, even things that are happening on a bus or indeed a train of bad behavior going unchallenged. If I see something wrong or something happening on a train, somebody acting out of order, I will politely confront them. But I do feel exposed, and I can understand why people would be hesitant to do that. But it's because of that people play on that, because they think they can get away with it. This walk-on-by society that we've become. Thankfully, it's not everywhere, and as you touched on, I'm sure we're going to see some heroic stories of people who did incredible things last night that prevented it from being even worse than it actually is.
You mentioned, and again, quite rightly, that we have very little information at this stage. I wonder, is this classed at this early stage as a vacuum, a void of information? And by which I mean things like the nationality of the people who've been arrested, because it's already bubbling away on social media. People are jumping to conclusions. They might be right, they might be wrong. Do we need to get more information out this morning?
Yes, you touched on something very important, which is that statement that will come from the police in order to close down speculation, which now, because of social media, can run rife. And that is the assurance that we want to hear, the details of what was behind this. There's talk that this was some form of Halloween prank that went wrong. Is that correct? So I think much will hinge on that press conference that will take place, I suspect, this morning. That's exactly what the public needs to hear immediately. And I suspect a message from the Prime Minister, indeed other leaders. Britain uses its trains. We're proud of our train system. We're not used to having armed guards everywhere, but we are.
Apologies, Tobias. We just lost you. We just lost you momentarily there. You were saying?
Well, I'm just saying that the nation needs that reassurance, and that press conference that will take place, I hope, will provide the details of the individual. We don't know the mental health of this individual, what motivated him. There's all these questions that need to be answered before speculation gets out of control, I'm afraid, because of social media.
Yes, it's two people who've been arrested, as you said, as we've said, two people arrested, and they were immediately taken to police station, I'm assuming, and but the point is that they've been allowed to have a good night's sleep, so that when they are actually questioned in the future, defence lawyers cannot claim that they've been interviewed under duress, and that therefore it is therefore that they could have the case thrown out. I mean, that's the that's the other thing that some people might find quite difficult.
It does raise, curious questions there. As soon as you know the details, the name of the individual, they'll be doing background checks, working out the family. They'll be speaking to the parents and other friends and family, getting a better understanding of who these individuals are, and then presenting that to the British public. But you're right, because there is this growing sense of fear that we're not used to. This is a very strange environment that we're in at the moment, and we've had series of attacks. Manchester Arena, for example, and the London attacks that you mentioned too. There is a knee-jerk connection that we make to say, is this a repeat of one of those incidents? I hope that isn't the case. I don't think this is the case here. But as soon as we have that confirmation by the police, I think the nation will be in a better place.
Yeah, and as you say, we do not know, and a lot of people online are already saying, well, of course it's terrorism. We don't know that. It hasn't yet been confirmed. However, should it prove to be the case, we also then need to look at the intelligence services, don't we? We know they do a tremendous amount of work. We know it only takes for one person to get through the net, and they stop lots of people all the time. But we would need to know about the intelligence, the chatter, the information that they've been looking at and working on, don't we?
We're in no different position from any other country across Europe in that threat that you articulate there. I would say that our intelligence services are some of the best in the world in understanding what is going on around us, being able to be one step ahead of the game in isolating these individuals. But somebody acting alone, clearly they don't come up on the horizon. They don't come up on the radar. But these, I believe, we will hear more. It would be wrong, in fact, to speculate any further about this until we have that police statement. But you're absolutely right to say that in today's world, the fact that counter-terrorism police are even involved now suggests that the police themselves are not ruling this out.
When you went to the aid of the police officer on Westminster Bridge, did you afterwards? I mean, we've talked about the people, obviously the most appalling situation for those and their families, the people who are dealing with life-threatening injuries. But afterwards, what did you find was the most helpful thing?
Well, I don't talk about it too much. I didn't handle it particularly well. There's the whole dealing with the incident itself. I, as many people do, not just me, whoever steps forward in these incidents, they're normally leaning on experience in the past. I was an Army officer. The training that you get, that encourages you to act the way that you do. I'm not alone here, and it's that gives you the confidence to be able to step forward. I stress it's not for everybody, and I'm not encouraging everybody to step into harm's way. But there are individuals in society that when they look at others on a train, they can then work out quite quickly who is willing to work with you to be able to close this situation down before it gets out of hand, or indeed it's already got out of hand, but they can limit the destruction that is about to ensue. And as I say, I'm sure we're going to hear stories of this spirit that we have to stand up and defend ourselves. It hasn't disappeared, despite the strange culture that we're currently going through in society today.
But we need to, I mean, and look, you're absolutely right in what you're saying. Clearly, your training, it helps you to be one of those people who run towards danger rather than run away from it. And that is what we expect of our armed forces, yes, but also actually our frontline police and our frontline medics and all these sort of people. And yet we're so keen, it's almost a national sport to give them a good kicking in this country. We need to change that, don't we? Because the vast majority of our frontline police and everybody else are actually really good men and women who put themselves in danger for our safety day in, day out.
I don't think you could have put it better. These are individuals that are servicing our country. They're stepping forward to support us, our society. They do not know how their day will unfold, whether it be a quiet day or a life-changing day. And they say goodbye to their loved ones and they go about their business, really not knowing what is they're going to have to confront. So absolutely, we should pay tribute to the not just the police, but the ambulance services, as you say, all those people who put themselves in danger. And the idea that any individuals in our society would then want to criticize or ridicule them, it's very, very sad indeed that we've got to that point. They are our heroes. They look after us, and they do so because they volunteered to step into that space, and they should have our support.
All right, Tobias, really good to talk to you, as always. Thank you very much indeed. I will say, and it's not a day for a lot of comment, but I am just fed up to the back teeth of the police being criticised. I know there are times when it's justified. I know there's been some very bad individuals, but the vast majority do this incredible work, and we saw it again last night, and they will be damaged and traumatised by what they've seen.
Yeah.
And we need to take our hats off to them and support them.
But actually, that's the point, is that there are bad individuals. It's a huge organisation when you talk about, if you talk about the police in this country. Of course there are going to be some bad apples. The former head of the Counter-terrorist unit at the Ministry of Defence is Major General Chipman. Can I get your thoughts? Can we get your thoughts on this?
Well, what we know at the moment is it was obviously a severe attack, and that's very unusual on a train. We don't normally expect that. We have exquisite security, of course, at airports now, both with cockpit security, airport security, and you expect on planes now to have a cooperative crowd, particularly after 9/11, when a crowd did get together to take someone down. I don't think we're going to go to a situation where we're going to have sort of airport type security on the trains, but I do think what Tobias says about sort of the cooperative crowd, people need to look at that and who's going to be around that you can sort of ping and rely on for the future. The US or the UK philosophy is always run, hide, tell. The US is run, hide, fight. There is a time when you might need to fight. What I'd say about the incident at the moment is it's very easy to go, particularly after Manchester on the 2nd of October, to a here we go again. I think that is very premature to do that. The involvement of CT police does not mean an incident is terrorism. They're often drawn in following these mass murders and mass incidents when the initial motive is uncertain. We don't know anything about the motive at the moment. And it may be, even if it is a terrorist incident, that there is no declaration because of the legal restrictions, which may be placed because of juries can be influenced if you start using that word. What I think the public will be given, they'll be given some information, which will be the information you need, that the suspects are under arrest, who they are eventually when they're charged, which they will be, presumably with either GBH or attempted murder, and that the public is now safe. And we must be very careful about the justice process being prejudiced by anything which is said.
But and that's, you know, absolutely right, Chip, and it's, you know, it's the way we've sort of always operated. The problem is, and whilst I really get what you're saying, the problem is the world has changed now, and people, frankly, believe what they see and hear on social media. And when there is a void, a vacuum of information, people make stuff up. People just assume things, and it gets leverage, it gets momentum, and it causes disruption in society. We've got to consider that, haven't we, in all of these sort of incidents?
Yeah, we do. And I haven't been on social media this morning, but if you're an analyst like me, you're always aware of three of these real biases and prejudices which come out. One is groupthink. The second, that's where you get the echo chambers we see all the time. The second one is framing bias. The third one is confirmation bias, and that's why you get into this here we go again. Now, for example, let me give you another example. On the Liverpool football incident in May, there was a very right-wing leader who said, "I'm hearing that the 54-year-old was not a white male." He was making an implication that he was an Islamist. You need to give the information in a timely fashion, the police, but not to prejudice the investigation. You're right in that the lightning speed of digital communications these days means that the sort of analog world, both of the news a lot of the time and in terms of legislation and how Parliament works, is sort of out of sync in 2025.
Are you surprised that it's now 12 hours on and we still haven't heard anything?
Really, and you know, I think that's still pretty premature. We don't know that anyone's been charged at the moment. I think that will come to bear. We don't even know if the two who were arrested were both bladed weapon attackers. It may have been that only one of them was a bladed weapon attacker. I think it was right at the time to call Plato because that's a sort of mobilization that got people to stop very quickly, or get the train to stop at Huntingdon, which was an unscheduled stop. So that could mobilize both the police, the fire and the ambulances. And it doesn't seem that unlike the Manchester one, for example, because there was a fake suicide vest there, for example, you'd have almost thought that chap was going to go for a death by cop. There doesn't seem to be any inclination here that there was anything of that. So anything beyond that is speculation at the moment, and it won't reach a terrorist threshold under the Terrorism Act 2000 unless there is a political, religious, ideological or racial element to it.
But, I mean, regardless of that, then, Chip, what about the threat level in the UK? Because, the problem, and we have seen time and time again, is whether, you know, even if this proves to be not a terrorist attack, it nevertheless, you get people who want to, you know, copycat, who see an opportunity and want to emulate it. Does that need to be reflected on a national level or not at this stage?
With a number of two things really to that, Stephen. The first one is actually the threat level at the moment is substantial. It's come down in the last couple of years from severe. That is, an attack is likely, not highly likely, and not imminent. And the other key factor, because we do often talk about, in my world, about threat inflation and dread hazard, is that if you put Rudakuna aside, which was not deemed to be a terrorist attack, it was deemed to be mass murder for the sake of mass murder, that no one was killed in a terrorist attack in 2024 in the UK. Someone has been this year, of course, because of Manchester. JTAC, who are independent of government, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, they are the ones who take all the prevailing factors to see if the terrorist threat level should be raised. What is clear, though, that since 7th of October 2023, there's certainly been more extremism, more hate crime, and that is reflected in the number of referrals, for example, to the Counter-terrorism Internet Referral Unit, to the number of referrals to Prevent, in terms of the Islamic hate crimes and in terms of anti-Semitic hate crimes. So society is fracturing. That doesn't necessarily mean it's terrorism. It doesn't also mean it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. You talked about it being did you say the dread hazard?
I did.
Yeah, so in other words, people dreading the fact that there might be something coming along the line. Is that what you mean by that? Is that what dread hazard is?
Yes, I do, Penny, and it's that which, for example, gets people to change their behaviours. So you might as a result of this, had people who are sort of scared to go on trains and take trains, as they were post 9/11, which actually had its own downside. So, for example, after 9/11, more people travelled by road. There were 1,000 additional deaths because of road traffic accidents. You know, that could sort of happen if you have that sort of displacement from mass rail travel into mass passenger travel on roads, for example.
Thank you very much, former head of the Counter-terrorist Unit at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman. I'd never heard of dread hazard.
No, I hadn't,
before.
but it's why actually it's always really useful to talk to Chip, because all these things which are clearly very complicated and we've got very great brains working around them, it gives you an insight. It gives you some indication as to how it works and how they're processing that.
Yeah.
Which I think is really... And the more information we have, the better. I know with legal stuff, there's some stuff that does have to be held back. But when we get to understand a little bit more of the processes that are happening, it gives us a chance to assess it a bit more clearly and not jump to conclusions.
Exactly. And also it's about working out, you know, how we react as a nation to something like this, because as Chip was saying, you know, your instant thought might be, I'm not going on a train today, or I'm never going to go on a train ever again, or whatever, and to be hyper vigilant, and nobody wants to live in a state of hyper vigilance.
No,
it is exhausting.
It is exhausting. Two things that it reminds me of. One is after what happened in London, people were getting on. I mean, there was a necessity in London to get on the tube. I mean, it doesn't operate without the tube, but people were making a point of getting on the tube in defiance, which was actually a very powerful sort of message and tool. But also when a guest earlier on was talking about Christmas fairs and armed police, I remember a couple of years ago in my local shopping centre, armed police wandering around, and it does make you nervous. But you
I think you're right. I think it makes you more nervous. I mean, I was one of those ones who deliberately went on the tube in a case of defiance, but I can't tell you, my heart was beating like a bass drum when I went on there. You know, and it was. I mean, I think everybody was hyper vigilant, and everybody, you know, if I was like that at all stages until I got off. So, you know, you do carry on, and actually, it does dissipate.
Yes, it does. Over time,
yeah.
But anyway, let's see where we are with it all, you know, a little bit later on in the day, of course, because we need a bit more clarity. But in the meantime, politicians have been reacting. The Prime Minister said on X, "My thoughts are with all those affected, and my thanks go to the emergency services for their response. People in the area need to follow the advice of the police."
The Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, urged people not to speculate last night. Wrote how deeply saddened she was to hear about the stabbings. "My thoughts go out to all those affected," she said. 2 suspects have been immediately arrested and taken into custody. I'm receiving regular updates on the investigation.
Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch said she was deeply disturbed by the reports emerging from Huntingdon. This was last night, of course. "It is a horrific attack, and my thoughts are with all those affected, including the emergency responders at the scene."
Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, tweeted that he was horrified by the reports coming out of Huntingdon. "My thoughts," he said, "are with those hurt and everyone who witnessed it. Thank you to the emergency services on the scene."
And Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, said he was deeply concerned as reports emerged of the horrific incident at Huntingdon. "Our thoughts and prayers with those affected, and our thanks go to the emergency response teams."
Well, stay with us as we bring you the very latest on that attack on board the LNER train in Huntingdon. But first, let's get a check on the forecast across the weather forecast across Europe.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries, all sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
After recent heavy rain across parts of Portugal and Spain, they are generally seeing a drier interlude at the moment, and Iberia is looking dry over the next couple of days, although further rain is expected here as we head later on into the week. So reversal of fortunes for parts of Italy, the Balkans and Greece, though they currently have the rain at the moment, some thunderstorms around as well. But this band of rain will continue its way eastwards, and so later on in the week it will return to drier and sunnier conditions for these countries.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Well, it's just coming up to 8:40, and the breaking news today is that counter-terror police are now leading the investigation into a mass stabbing on board a train. 10 people were stabbed, actually. 9 still have life-threatening injuries.
British Transport Police say 2 people have been arrested in connection with the attack, which happened on a service between Peterborough and London.
Well, eyewitnesses reported scenes of panic, one describing a man waving a large knife as passengers fled from carriage to carriage.
In a statement, the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said his thoughts are with all those affected, and he praised emergency services for their swift response.
Well, a short time ago, we spoke to the Mayor of Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, Paul Bristow.
Today's obviously going to be a day where we will reflect on what's happened. We can talk about, how we let the public know exactly what's happened in that open and transparent way. I think that's really, really important. And we've got to learn the lessons of all this. And obviously the train was travelling in the main through Cambridgeshire. It wasn't scheduled to stop at Huntingdon. It did so because it was the right place to stop, or the quickest place to stop, to get the emergency services on the scene and of course the perpetrator arrested. But look, we have to learn the lessons of what was a truly horrific incident. Well, none of us know how we would react in these circumstances, and it seems to me that everyday people are capable of extraordinary things. And the gentleman you refer to protect a young girl like that, I mean, I hope when all things come to light that he's okay. That's the first thing, because I understand he's got injuries to his neck and his head, but hopefully he's recognised for what he did. We're all capable of extraordinary things, and none of us know how we will react in such horrific circumstances. The train was just travelling through Cambridgeshire. It wasn't scheduled to stop at Huntingdon, but local people will be understandably concerned that this sort of incident could happen on their doorstep, and anyone intending to travel by train. I mean, this is the first type of incident I think we've ever seen on a train, which is an enclosed environment, a very difficult environment to control because it's moving and you can't simply open the doors or anything. So, that's understandable. But that's why I think, as I say, a controlled but open and transparent release of information is the best way. I think people can be trusted with information. I mean, I know everyone's a journalist now on social media, etc., and there'll be lots of speculation, but that's why I think it's really important to release that information in an open and transparent way.
Yes, thank you very much. It's interesting because I started my career on the Peterborough Evening Telegraph, so I kind of know that area as well. And Huntingdon's is quite a small market town, and you would not expect this ever to be happening on your doorstep. Joining us now is GB News national reporter Jack Carson. Jack, can you bring us up to date?
Yeah, well, those investigations continue here at Huntingdon Station. The last half an hour or so, we have seen, more police officers, what could well be investigators, arrive on the scene to continue, these investigations long into the night. We saw just how active the police response and presence was here, and how investigations started from the moment that those 2 people were taken into custody by armed response officers on that train last night. We've seen officers appearing to be down on the tracks with torches, looking under the train, both at the back of the train, which you'll just be able to see behind me, as well as along the train, as well as they conduct those investigations and that forensic work, which continues into this morning. We got a statement from the British Transport Police last night confirming that they were called at 7:42 p.m. to say that they had received reports of a multiple stabbing on board the 6:25 p.m. train service from Doncaster to King's Cross. The local MP confirming that the attack from the conversation he'd had with the Chief Constable of Cambridgeshire Police had begun shortly after the train had left Peterborough Station. It made an emergency stop here in order for those armed police and Cambridgeshire Police officers to board the train and arrest those 2 people in connection with the incident, who remain in custody this morning. They confirmed in that statement last night that 10 people had been taken to hospital, and this morning 9 remain in hospital with suffering from life-threatening injuries. 1 who was taken to hospital is being treated for non-life-threatening injuries, and so far there have been no fatalities that we know of. They did confirm that they had declared this a major incident and were working in connection with counter-terrorism police as part of this investigation, very much because at this stage we do not yet know a motivation, and so the British Transport Police ensuring that those counter-terrorism officers are involved and playing an active role in this investigation. The Chief Superintendent, Chris Casey, from the British Transport Police, called this a shocking incident, but confirmed that they were continuing to conduct their inquiries and establish what had happened. They say it could take some time before they were in a position to confirm anything further, and they say at this early stage it would not be appropriate to speculate on the causes of the incident, but did confirm that, as I was saying, the response very much here is still active and still ongoing here at the station. Cordons in place, trains, you might have heard one go by just a second ago, trains not stopping into this station, rail replacement bus services in order, running around the area in order for people who were meant to catch a train here this morning to continue to do so. But from eyewitness accounts, we heard just of the horrors of that horrific attack on the train last night. One, Ollie Foster, saying that he got on the train from Peterborough. He said they ran from the back of the train to the end of it as everyone was screaming to run, explaining there was somebody, he says, stabbing everyone and everything. He said at first he thought it was a joke, but very quickly other passengers on the train realised just how serious this incident was. They said we didn't really know what we were up against, and at one point he says he saw an older man get in the way of a young girl who he said was being attacked, and he said that essentially they got to the end of the train and realised that they could not go any further, and passengers in that last carriage were trying to pick up anything, not knowing exactly what was going to come through the door and not knowing exactly what they were going to face, so picking up anything, including one eyewitness saying a Jack Daniels whiskey bottle, trying to have any kind of thing to try and fend off those attackers on that train. It was then that the train pulled into Huntington station here where we are this morning, and those armed response officers were able to board it and make the arrests of those 2 people who remain in custody this morning.
It is going to be a huge job, actually, Jack, isn't it, for police to go through all these witness statements, well, to go and collect them and go through with these individuals involved in all of this, as well as all the CCTV that we've talked about, and as well as all the forensic work, which you said is still ongoing. But I guess it is that minutiae of work, it's the bread and butter to make sure that they do have a rock-solid case if this gets to court.
Absolutely, and of course, you know, the scenes we saw overnight of those forensic officers searching with torches under the train, that is not necessarily because there was something confirmed and definitely under that train. That is very much, as you were saying, so that the forensic teams were thorough, so that there was no stone left unturned in this investigation, and they will be going through the train, those forensic officers, with a fine-tooth comb, not only, as you said, the CCTV to be able to track the movements of the people that were attacking those other passengers on that train last night, those CCTV all the way from Peterborough station and beyond at other stations to try and work out exactly where those attackers got onto the train and exactly at which moment they started their attack. And just as you were saying, the amount of witnesses that the police are going to have to work through over the next few days or so. We know when the train stopped to made that emergency stop here at Huntington Station last night. There were a lot of passengers that obviously fled onto the platform once they know that those 2 attackers had been taken care of by the armed police team, and they were then waiting around, a lot of them for hours, waiting to be seen by a police officer in order to be able to have their statements taken, in order to be able to describe exactly what they saw. And all of those eyewitness statements will be able to, in the long run, be corroborated with that CCTV footage to establish a proper picture of exactly what happened here. But for now, we are scarce of some of those finer details as we await more information from the British Transport Police. And as we've been saying, all we know really is what they have told us and what those eyewitnesses who have been very, of course, open to telling their horrific stories have said. Of course, the local MP here confirming that Operation Plato had been issued as part of the response in that 999 call, and the police headquarters is a very short distance from the train station here, as is the local hospitals, and that, I'm sure, you know, was a huge impact and huge factor in that emergency response being able to be so quick and so thorough. We know that air ambulances from not just this region but other regions, including Essex, had attended the scene here in order to make sure that the emergency response from the paramedics and ambulance service was of the highest priority. And we know, you know, critical care teams were here, and as we were saying, you know, 9 people in hospital with what have been described so far as life-threatening injuries, and the local MP confirming that there had been response officers from Cambridgeshire Constabulary, as well as, of course, those armed response officers. He says the British Transport Police has primacy in this investigation, and as we were confirming there, the counter-terrorism policing are involved in this investigation and very active, as though, of course, those investigations both there at their offices where they, I'm sure, reviewing that footage that has been able to be collected over the last few hours or so, as well as, of course, the officers here. Those investigations still very much underway.
Yeah, the Plato, thank you very much, Jack. The Plato code word for the fact that ongoing marauder, yeah, exactly, marauding situation. And also, of course, the police have got to be going through all the anything that was left on board, because obviously people fled at Huntingdon, so they would have left their bags, and the attackers could possibly have thrown stuff into their bag. So there's so much that the police are going to have to investigate. Well, Ken Hine is an anti-knife campaigner, joins us now. We do know that Sir Keir Starmer has called this a crisis, a knife crisis, and former chair of the Haringey Independent Stop and Search Monitoring Group also should mention that. But here we are again then, Ken, with this appalling story this morning.
Yes, my condolence goes out to those who are affected by it, and it must have been a horrific scene on that train, and having backed up to the last carriage, having nowhere else to go, and facing 1 or 2 maniacs, however it is, would have been horrifying for the passengers and anyone in that vicinity.
Oh, absolutely it would. It begs the question, what can be done about this problem of knife crime, Ken? Because it's an everyday object. This is the problem. It is a lethal everyday object.
That's right. Even though we just recently heard about 60,000 knives has been seized or taken off the streets, it doesn't put a dent into the mindset of the person behind who's holding the knife. And this is a case in point, whereas you cannot totally eradicate it, but what we can do is start working on people's emotional mindset. That people don't pay much attention to their emotional well-being. And in this case, when we're getting a lot of social media, horrific scenes on social media that plays on people's mind, this could be a case in point. With people's acting random violence, and it seems like there's at least a couple of people involved in this incident. Thankfully, it seems like the police have arrested them. My only thing about the police is that we really want to know, is it safe for us to go on the trains? Should we be aware? Should we be looking out for anything? Is this where it is? Is this a random thing? Or is it deeper than that? Is there more people out there that we should be aware of?
Yes, there was even a suggestion, wasn't there, at one stage, that if knives were made without sharp ends, you could still cut everything, for example, use it in the kitchen. The thing is that there will always be a way of getting around almost everything. If you want to get one of these knives, then you can. The internet is there, and it seems to be extraordinarily easy to get knives?
Yes, it's called a World Wide Web. That means you can get it from any part of the world. And if you've got money, unscrupulous seller will always get you the product you want. And if you're determined, you will do so. But as I said beforehand, we have to really look at seeing what we can do to build in people's self-esteem, particularly if we can get to young people, building their self-esteem, letting them know that they're going to have challenges in life. But what they don't want to do is to revert to this sort of violence. It's unacceptable on any level.
And in the immediate term, I mean, you're looking at societal change there, Ken, which is admirable, but long-term. What do we need to do in the immediate term when we look at what has happened overnight? I mean, do we need to have more random stop and searches? Do we need to have, electronic arches at railway stations and increased sort of security that way? Are there more immediate steps?
Personally, a determined person will always do its best to get through to whatever hideous things they want to do. So having more stop and search is only gonna, and if it's not done in a professional way, will only alienate the very community you're trying to get through. So what we don't want to do is have people believe that there are victims. Because when they've got a victim mentality, this is where the downward spiral occurs. But if there was a way, as I said, if there was a way of having that positive interaction with the police to improve the confidence in the police, then I feel that would work. But as it stands at the moment, the police has still got a lot of work to do around engagement with particularly marginalised community or disenfranchised community. So personally, I don't think stop and search is the way forward. I believe more education. I believe for youngsters under the age of 18 who gets caught with a knife, that there is a short, sharp shock treatment for those first-time offenders to try to scare them straight away from walking or carrying a knife.
Ken, thank you very much. Ken Hine, anti-knife campaigner there. So, yeah, just to update you, the train is still standing there. The crime scene, it is now a crime scene. The train is now still standing at platform 2 at Huntingdon. And it would have been it's a very quick trip from Peterborough to London. It's a very swift trip. It generally doesn't stop in fact, you can get a train from there and pretty much 40 minutes from Peterborough to London. It doesn't normally stop at Huntingdon. Huntingdon is not a big area, so you would not normally stop there. I think the next stop was going to be Stevenage.
Yeah. But what we don't... I mean, there are lots of questions about the people who carried out this attack. Did they get on at Peterborough? Actually, this train started in Doncaster, which about an hour earlier, an hour before the Peterborough departure. So would they have got on there? We just don't know. This is where CCTV will come into play and will be very useful to the because they need to backtrack where the suspects have been when they got on, where they've come from in the first place. It's about putting together that picture.
Yeah, because actually, as you said, it started, so the train left Peterborough at 7:30 and the first emergency calls were made 10 minutes later. 10 minutes later. So, yeah.
So it would indicate, wouldn't it, that that's where they got on. But all these details need to be found out. We will bring you continuing coverage of this horrific incident. But first, let's just get a quick check on the weather.
Today's outlook: cool, calm and completely horizontal. Boxed Aircon sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, and very good morning to you. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Bright and breezy is the theme for many of us throughout today. Breezy because there's a lot of isobars on the chart here, indicating where we've got some quite brisk westerly winds. A few weather fronts lingering around as well. One across the far southeast to begin with, a wet start to the day here. And there's another one just skirting through the northwest of Scotland, providing quite frequent showers. Those could be heavy at times, maybe even with some hail, rumbles of thunder. The wind's strongest up towards the northwest as well. We could see some coastal gales for the Outer Hebrides, the Highlands, and over towards the Northern Isles later on in the day. For elsewhere, though, there will be some sunshine poking its way through at times, and if you manage to see that and you get out of the breeze a bit, it won't feel too bad. Temperatures around 10 to 13 degrees Celsius for most of us. However, the cloud is going to build out towards the west later on in the day, initially for Northern Ireland, and we'll see some longer spells of rain arriving here into the evening. And that cloud and rain is slowly going to progress its way eastwards as we head into the overnight period. Turning quite damp and dreary for many of us. That rain heaviest out towards Western Hills, parts of Erie, the Pennines, getting quite a lot of rain into the start of Monday morning. But with all of that cloud, it's also filtering in some much milder conditions, so many of us will actually be starting off tomorrow morning in double-digit figures. But a lot of cloud on the scene. Those outbreaks of rain will be continuing, again heaviest for some western hills. If you are a little bit further towards the east, you might see a few glimmers of brightness and a touch more shelter. But those winds are going to be strong right across the board, coastal gales in the most exposed regions. But still, though, coming in from a southwesterly direction means those temperatures are going to be notably above average for the time of year. Most of us around 15 to 16 degrees Celsius. This unsettled and mild theme is looking to continue throughout a good portion of the forthcoming week as well. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Today's outlook: cool, calm and completely horizontal. Boxed Aircon sponsors the weather on GB News.
It is 9 o'clock and our breaking news overnight. 9 people still fighting for their lives in hospital after a mass stabbing on a train in Cambridgeshire.
Police have declared a major incident and counter-terrorism officers are investigating the attack in which 10 passengers were stabbed.
2 men have been arrested at Huntingdon Station by armed police shortly before 8 o'clock last night.
Well, those armed police officers, of course, boarding that train to arrest those 2 suspects who remain in custody this morning. The British Transport Police say they are conducting their urgent inquiries, and we've seen forensics on site here this morning.
Witnesses say passengers hid in the lavatories to avoid the assailants, with others describing scenes of pure chaos and like something from a film.
Well, the politicians have been reacting, understandably so. The Prime Minister says the appalling incident is deeply concerning. And earlier we spoke to the local MP for Huntingdon, Ben Abeti-Jekti.
This morning, forensic teams have been seen on site scouring the tracks near the train.
Well, it has just gone 9 o'clock. We will continue to bring you the latest. I'm Stephen Dixon.
I'm Penny Smith and this is GB News Breakfast.
So, that breaking news is that counter-terrorism police are now in charge of the investigation into a mass stabbing incident of 10 people on board a train, which has left 9 of them with life-threatening injuries.
British Transport Police say 2 people have been arrested. And Jack Carson is... we talked about the eyewitnesses, and this was on a train from Peterborough to London, and it stopped at Huntingdon after passengers described a man waving a large knife. Passengers fleeing from the carriage.
Well, let's take you to the scene then, should we? Because our national reporter, Jack Carson, is there. We've had no major updates on this overnight, have we, Jack? I mean, presumably, we are going to get something from the police at some time this morning.
Yeah, we are expecting something this morning in the way of an update. Of course, the last statement we got was around midnight last night from the British Transport Police, who confirmed that they were called to reports of multiple stabbings on a train. They say at 7:42 p.m. yesterday. It was the 6:25 train service from Doncaster to London King's Cross. Reports that the attack started shortly after the train had left Peterborough, and it making an emergency stop here at the station in order for the police, armed police, as the British Transport Police confirmed, to arrest 2 people, they say, in connection with the incident, who remain in police custody this morning. They also confirmed in that statement last night that 10 people had been taken to nearby hospitals, 9 of those suffering from life-threatening injuries, 1 with a non-life-threatening injuries. No fatalities at this stage have been confirmed by the emergency services. and of course this has been declared a major incident by the British Transport Police. They have brought in counter-terrorism police as part of this investigation, simply because we at this stage do not know a motivation behind this attack. The Chief Superintendent from the British Transport Police, Chris Casey, saying that they were conducting their urgent inquiries to establish exactly what has happened, but they did say last night that it would take a while for them to be able to provide an update and confirm exactly anything further. But they said that their response last night was ongoing at the station. We saw that very actively, didn't we? Forensic officers, other investigating officers with searchlights on the tracks looking under the train. Of course, that is not a confirmation that anything was there, but of course the police wanting to be so thorough with its investigation to make sure that no stone is unturned. And this morning we have seen the arrival of forensic officers, those officers suiting up into, of course, their suits in order to be able to go onto the train and continue their investigations. This will broaden over the next 24 hours into the police collecting CCTV from multiple different train stations to try and exactly establish when the attackers boarded the train and exactly their movements throughout the train, and of course throughout the carriages. We heard from eyewitnesses, including one from Ollie Foster, just how horrifying the situation was. He said that he got on the train from Peterborough, and it was shortly after he boarded the train that the attack started to happen. He said, "We ran from the back of the train to the end as everyone was screaming to run," explaining that there was somebody stabbing everyone, he says, and everything. He said at first he thought it might have been a joke, but very quickly he understood the seriousness of the situation. He said that a young girl was distraught as the attacker tried to attack her, but an older man, he said, got in the way, sustaining injuries himself. I'm sure over the next few days and weeks we're going to hear of the heroics of some of the passengers on that train as those attackers seemingly went down the carriage trying to cause as much damage as possible. Of course, on a train you can only go so far, and people were trying to rush into the furthest carriage away from where the attacks were taking place and seemingly waiting at the doors for what might well confront them. People saying that they were trying to grab any kind of possible item that they could use to try and fend off those attackers, and it was at that point when the train pulled into Huntington Station and those armed officers were able to board the train, arrest 2 people in suspicion in connection with this incident who remain in custody this morning. And the paramedic and emergency response, no doubt aided by the fact that the local police headquarters is nearby to here. There are local hospitals nearby to here, which would have allowed that emergency response to, as thorough as we saw it, to be so quick. The East of England ambulance service confirmed that they mobilised a large-scale response here to the station after they were called at 7:38 p.m. Last night, saying, of course, that multiple people have been stabbed on a train. They said that they issued numerous ambulances, tactical commanders, a hazardous area response team, as well as critical care teams from the East Anglian Air Ambulance as well. And this just indicates, I think, the size of the response, that there was air ambulance teams from both Essex and also Herts and Magpie's Air Ambulance as well, just showing how immediate and quick the response was to an order that those people who needed to be seen by paramedics and needed to be taken to hospital could do so at the earliest possible moment, of course. And we've had much reaction from both local politicians and national politicians as well. The Prime Minister calling this an appalling incident, saying this was a deeply concerning event, and his thoughts, of course, with all those affected, including those emergency response people who attended here. The leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, saying that she was also deeply disturbed by the incidents and the reports coming from Huntingdon, calling this an absolutely horrific attack, saying that she, of course, had her thoughts with those affected at the scene. And here at the scene this morning at Huntingdon train station, just to confirm, as I was saying, that forensic officers have been seen arriving this morning as those investigations continue.
OK, Jack, I know you're going to keep us up to date, but for now, thanks very much indeed.
Yes, coming up next is the Community Mini Show with Andrew Pearce, who joins us from Westminster. So all of the politicians saying that, well, the main thing is obviously saying horrific attack, thoughts with those affected, and all of them commending the emergency responders at the scene.
Absolutely. Of course, and I'll be talking to a number of politicians on this programme, including Kevin Holinrake, who is the Tory party chairman, and of course we'll be getting their reaction. We'll keep you up to date with the unfolding horror in Huntingdon after that terrible double knife attack. We'll also be talking to the politicians about the ongoing, it's the first anniversary, believe it or not, of Kemi Bade not becoming Tory leader, and the drama continues over Rachel Reeves and her letting arrangements for her home in South London. But the main story will be what's happening in Huntingdon and the fact that 9 people have got life-threatening injuries. Stay tuned with me, Andrew Pearce, in for Camilla Tominey here in Westminster this morning.
Yeah, Andrew, actually, I was going to ask you, because of all the people we've been interviewing this morning, and obviously a lot of them former police or police and crime commissioners, and we say, well, you know, what needs to be done? What do we need to do to try and bring some sense of calm? And we don't know what the motive is at the moment, so, you know, we don't want to jump the gun on things. But so many of them have said, we need more police officers. We need a general boosting in police numbers in this country, 20,000 or more. We need to see them at police stations. We need to see them at shopping centres a lot more. And yet, will that ever happen?
Well, if you remember when Theresa May was Home Secretary, she cut the police numbers by 20,000. I could never understand a Conservative government doing anything so reckless and stupid. Now, the last government claimed that they restored all those numbers, but we don't see them. When do you ever see a Bobby on the beat? It's a terrible cliche, but a Bobby on the beat is a deterrent, it's a presence, and it's reassuring. And I'm sure the staff behaved heroically on that train, but you very rarely see a British Transport Police officer on the trains I use, and I use trains a lot. So there will be pressure on the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, to tell us exactly where the police are and what they're doing.
Good point. Thank you very much, Andrew Pearce there. And that is the point, isn't it? When was the last time I use trains a lot, and I genuinely, in the last year, not one. Don't think I've seen one British Transport Police officer. And sometimes, because things do kick off, as we know, on public transport, I've done that classic thing of just changing carriages, just because I think I don't want to deal with this, and that is true. You know what we were talking about a bit earlier about people who do go towards danger, the police officers and those sort of and heroes, frankly.
Oh yeah, but it's interesting because the people who have said, you know, we need to be able to sort of fight a bit more in these situations. I mean, Tobias Elwood was saying it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone.
And you shouldn't feel guilty because of the fact that you did.
You want to run away.
That you want to run away.
Because that's also human instinct. But there are some people, and we're already getting some stories of heroism from the train last night of people protecting others.
Yeah, and also with wounds and knowing what to do and
but you know,
the blood.
But you, I mean, there's one older gentleman who apparently sort of put himself in between an attacker and a young girl. Absolutely heroic. But by doing that, you are putting yourself in severe danger, and apparently he was attacked.
He was injured, yeah.
But some people are built that way. And we need to applaud them, actually.
We do. They are heroes and heroines, every single one of them.
Anyway, someone who knows all about this, actually, in that he was in the military. You'll recognise him from The Breakfast Show. We used to have him on doing the papers an awful lot. He was in the armed forces. He served tours of Afghanistan. He's seen some pretty nasty things up close. Now, anyway, since the last election, he was elected as the MP for Huntingdon, Ben Obesi-Jekti, and we spoke to him earlier.
It's a real tragedy, and wake up this morning, having been here till the early hours of last night as well. It really hits home that this was such a tragic incident, and that so many lives have been potentially shattered off the back of it. Thinking this morning and seeing the devastation when I arrived last evening, it really is shocking that something could happen in a place like this. This isn't an incident that any area is used to, least of all an area like Huntingdon. The train behind me is the train in question. Is the train from Doncaster to King's Cross. The area behind me was the incident response area on the other side of the station, and the A1307 is still closed. But when I arrived last night, there must have been 20 to 30 police cars, around 10 ambulances and multiple fire engines as well. So I pay credit to the emergency services who did an incredible job working interagency to bring the situation under control. The response time was just a few minutes, and I'd like to pay credit to the local response officers, the officers that you might see on a town centre on Saturday night, who are actually the first officers on the scene, shortly before the armed officers turned up, and they came to the scene of devastation and started to deal with it. So credit to those officers. The fact that a place like this, which is semi-rural Cambridgeshire, could be brought into scope of what is potentially a mass casualty incident, and we don't yet know the motive for the attack, but it is something that is incredibly serious. And whatever the motives were, 10 people have been left injured, 9 of those seriously with life-threatening injuries. And for that to happen somewhere like this means that this isn't happening in a big city centre. It's something that we should be mindful and we should all be vigilant at all times. I got here shortly after 9 p.m. And was here through to midnight, by which point a lot of the police response had moved away. This morning it looks, other than the fact that the main road is shut, it looks very quiet. The station's obviously cordoned off with police tape. And there are officers making sure that no one can get closer to the scene. But it is quite quiet. There are just a handful of police cars and officers just continuing to map the scene and to clear up. The train is still here. Presumably there is forensics that still needs to be done. I'm not clear when that train will move. But it's a much quieter scene than it was last night. But last night was truly a horrific scene. It was important to work cross-party. I've had messages from members across the House, and so everybody, I think, is united in wanting to work to get to the bottom of what occurred and to prevent it from ever happening again.
So that's the local MP. It's interesting because there's two sides to this, isn't there? There's the investigation and perpetrators that obviously is a very solid side of that, but there's also the softer side, which is victims, witnesses, local communities, first responders. And for them, you've got to think about the tremendous amount of work that they do and the sympathy you have to have with them as they deal with the aftermath of all of this, which is hugely difficult, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a large crime scene, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just the train there, which is now still on platform 2 at Huntingdon, which I mentioned before. Huntingdon, Cambridgeshire, it's about 50, 60 miles, I think, from London, like I'd say. And it's a market town, and a shocking thing to happen. Well, former Detective Superintendent for the Metropolitan Police, Shabnam Chowdhury, joins us now. The police, as Stephen was saying, such a massive job to do here.
Yes, good morning to you both. Yeah, absolutely huge operation for the police. You look at the train, the location, the scene, the number of victims, comes with that, with families who they need to inform, and also the most important, well, not the most important, but certainly key to this is the perpetrators that have been arrested are currently in custody, and the police working at an incredibly fast pace to identify who they are, what's their profile, if they're known to them, and also to see if potentially there might be any other outstanding suspects that need to be arrested.
Yeah, what sort of team would you put on this, Shabnam? Because you've got all those different elements. You've got the forensics, you've got CCTV, you've got people who are obviously going to have to talk to the suspects in all of this. I mean, that must be a big team, mustn't it, with a lot of coordination needed?
Yeah, there'll be a huge team. There will be, obviously, British Transport Police have taken primacy, but they have got the support and the assistance at the moment of the Counter-terrorism team. And this is where they come into play, because they have the resources, the capacity, the asset, the skills and the experience in order to bring this together. But they will be working very jointly together to establish exactly what has happened. The police counter-terrorism teams will have the resources on the ground in terms of the forensics, because they'll have that form of capability, whilst local officers and British Transport Police themselves do their part in this operation.
So it would be run, though, by the Counter-terrorism Police. They would be the people to whom everybody is reporting, is that right?
Well, no, actually, the Counter-terrorism Police will be reporting to British Transport, because British Transport have primacy, but they will be working side by side as a joint investigation. Local policing doesn't necessarily have the resources, and also to be able to bring those resources on so quickly on an incident of this scale. Remember, this was started around 7:44 yesterday evening, and they've worked throughout the night. So Huntingdon and Cambridgeshire Police also have to manage business as usual. So having the resources of the counter-terrorism team and their capacity and asset will be of huge benefit to them.
How painstaking is it in terms of an operation where, you know, they've arrested 2 people immediately, they have prime suspects. However, you know, you've got to go and start piecing all this together. You've got to start building a case. How painstaking is that process?
Well, it'll be like a minutiae, sort of every single minute of that detail, minutiae of the detail has got to be pieced together. They've got to put it together and they've got to put a timeline. Remember, this individual came from somewhere. They've got to look at when he boarded the train, who he boarded the train with, where he started in the carriages. So the whole of that train becomes a crime scene. He himself becomes a crime scene. So they'll have like different aspects of, you'll have the scene, the victim, the community, the train itself, and then you've got to bring all that together. And remember, they also have to work with the other blue light services, so they're working with the ambulance services, with the hospitals, to try and get information from potentially some of those victims who may be able to support the investigation at a very early stage. But I think right now the key is to let the hospital services take care of the victims, the police officers who will get family liaison officers directed to those hospitals, but also for the actual investigative teams to put together a timeline and to establish exactly what has happened and why it's happened and the type of incident that we're looking at.
Yes, it's 1 or 2. So it's 2 people arrested, but it does seem, well, from what the information that we have, that it was 1 person with the knife, though. And of course, in amongst all this crime scene, which is the carriages on this train, you've got all the abandoned bags and everything else that the victims would have left as the doors opened at Huntingdon and they fled the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that really struck me last night and in the early hours of this morning is the fact that we're looking at a train, so a really small, confined space where the members of the public are in such despair. I'm going to get really upset about it because it's just so horrific that they don't know where to go. There's absolutely no escape for them in terms of how they can actually get away from this particular individual, and the scenes that would have confronted them, horrific. In respect of all those bags and the items left behind by members of the public, each and every one of those items also become part and parcel of that crime scene, because we don't know what the suspect had on their persons, where they left anything, whether they carried anything more on them. So the police will go through the painstaking aspect of going through all of those items, then being able to identify them and then give them back to the victims at some point. So it will be very, very fast moving, but it will also have some aspect of a slow pace. And I know, reading on social media this morning, members of the public are speculating and they want to know and they want to demand answers right now. But if police had given information at the very early stages and then that information had been wrong, that would have jeopardised not only the investigation but the public confidence. So I think it's really key that we wait for the police to come forward. As I understand it, they're going to come out before 10 a.m. to give a statement to the public as to where we are with this investigation, where they are, and what they need actually from members of the public and other information in relation to, most likely to do with the suspect as well, or the suspects.
It's interesting, Shabnam, that you said you didn't want to get upset thinking about the situation those passengers were in. It's like something out of a Hollywood horror film, isn't it? And yet you're all a tough bunch, the thin blue line, but you are human, you're not robots. And I wonder, how do you even begin to cope with what those first responders will have seen at the scene?
It's really weird because in my experience of having dealt with so many critical incidents, knife murders, shootings and so on, you get to the scene and when you're confronted with horrific, scenes right in front of you, your body, your brain just goes into automatic pilot. You're there to protect the public, to preserve the scene, and also to ensure that you can minimise the casualties. And you just go into automatic pilot. But I can tell you, in my experience, when you actually walk away from that scene and you go home to your family and to your loved ones, and then the reality sets in. Some of these officers may never, ever have been confronted with scenes like this before, but they just go straight into what they've been trained to do and to get on with the job. And then it's at a later stage that this sets in. And I would like to think, and I know that through experiences, you do have processes in place for post-critical incident briefings for those officers that would need that welfare support. But their priority as police officers who do the job that they do in the uniform is to run towards danger and to ensure that they can keep the public safe and preserve the scene to make sure that these vile, despicable perpetrators are brought to justice.
All right. Former DS Chowdhury, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Puts it so well. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for keeping us company this morning on this terrible morning. Up next, it is Committed to Mini Show with Andrew Pearce.
First, so here's the weather.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, and very good morning to you. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Bright and breezy is the theme for many of us throughout today. Breezy because there's a lot of isobars on the chart here, indicating where we've got some quite brisk westerly winds. A few weather fronts lingering around as well, one across the far southeast to begin with, a wet start to the day here, and there's another one just skirting through the northwest of Scotland, providing quite frequent showers. Those could be heavy at times, maybe even with some hail, rumbles of thunder. The wind's strongest up towards the northwest as well. We could see some coastal gales for the Outer Hebrides, the Highlands, and over towards the Northern Isles later on in the day. For elsewhere, though, there will be some sunshine poking its way through at times, and if you manage to see that and you get out of the breeze a bit, it won't feel too bad. Temperatures around 10 to 13 degrees Celsius for most of us. However, the clouds